Hi guys. Tonight we step inside the dim corridors of a medieval castle, where the air feels ancient and sharp, where each breath seems to crystallize and hang before your eyes. The year is a cold one, colder than memory dares recall. Outside, the wind howls across the moors, rattling the heavy oak doors and whispering through arrow slits that never quite seal. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool rough against your skin, and already you sense that warmth, here, is not a given, but a conquest. You might even think you probably won't survive this winter without a very good fire and an even better blanket. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. The first thing you notice about the castle is not the grandeur or the glittering banners. It's the temperature, an almost living thing that creeps beneath the doorways and slinks into your bones. Your fingers ache before the first hour passes. The stone walls that once promised safety from raiders and war now feel like giant blocks of ice, exhaling chill into every corridor. You walk across the flagstones of the great hall, boots echoing softly. The torches along the wall hiss and sputter in the draught, each one a tiny rebellion against the dark. The flicker of their flames dances over tapestries, faded depictions of hunts and battles, and the threads shimmer faintly, their colors dulled by centuries. Still, they hang there as both decoration and insulation, helping, if only slightly, to keep the cold from claiming the walls entirely. You can hear your own breathing in this vast room. Somewhere above, a draught hums through the rafters like a ghostly song. In winter, everything in a castle has a sound. The groan of wood, the clink of chainmail as guards shift, the faint dripping of melted frost down the walls. To stay warm here is an art form. The people who lived within these walls didn't have central heating or cozy radiators. Instead, they relied on layers, layers of fabric, layers of people, layers of hope. Fires blazed in hearths large enough to roast an ox, and yet even those mighty flames rarely reached the far corners of the room. You could sit right next to the fire and still feel a thread of chill sneaking down your neck. The irony, of course, is that castles were designed to protect, not to comfort. Their thick stone walls, up to 10 feet deep in places, were excellent at stopping arrows but terrible at keeping in heat. The same cold stone that repelled invaders also repelled warmth. And because the builders cared more about defense than domestic ease, you find narrow windows, vast halls, and soaring ceilings, all magnificent for echoing sermons and battle cries, but disastrous for anyone seeking a cozy night's sleep. Historians estimate that the temperature inside many castles during deep winter could drop below freezing, even indoors. Imagine waking up to find frost clinging to your bed curtains or your water jug frozen solid beside you. You'd light the fire before dawn, but even then, the chill would linger like an unwelcome guest. One curious fact: some records from the 13th century suggest that the wealthiest nobles kept braziers, portable metal bowls filled with coals close to their feet during meals, an early medieval version of a space heater. A servant's job might be to replace the coals quietly, ensuring their lord's toes didn't freeze mid-feast. But there's also a strange kind of beauty in this hardship. As you stand in that great hall, looking toward the flickering hearth, you realize warmth was more than physical. It was social, emotional. People gathered around the fire not just to survive, but to feel alive. It was where news was shared, songs were sung, and silence was filled with companionship. You picture the scene: a long oak table, scarred by knives and time. The lord's family sits wrapped in furs, hands extended toward the glow. Servants move briskly, their breath visible in the cold air. The dogs curl near the fire's edge, tails twitching in dream. The smell of burning oak mingles with roasted meat and damp wool. The firelight paints everyone in gold and shadow. It's easy to romanticize the past, but this was no fairy tale. The cold was relentless, and winter was a test. Castles in places like Northumberland, or the Highlands of Scotland, or the snowy edges of the Alps, those were the worst. Chroniclers wrote that even wine turned to slush in the goblets and that ink froze in the wells. There's one account from a monk in the 14th century who claimed his parchment cracked as he tried to write during a bitter January. Whether it's true or not, historians still argue whether he exaggerated or genuinely recorded the kind of cold that could snap vellum. And yet, people endured. The same walls that chilled them also stood firm against storms and sieges. The castle, in its cold magnificence, was a paradox, a place both of power and discomfort. The flickering torches, the endless layers of wool, the constant effort to hold on to heat, these were the rhythms of life here. You sit by the fire now, just as they did. The flames pop and sigh, casting sparks that vanish into the blackness above. You can almost feel the ghosts of old inhabitants near you, a cook rubbing her hands, a knight thawing his boots, a child staring dreamily at the dancing light. The warmth you share with them is faint, but it's real, timeless even. Outside, the wind still prowls along the battlements, clawing for a way in. The stars glitter above, bright and cruel. The castle endures, its stones locked in frost, its torches defiant. And as you watch the fire gutter and lean forward, you begin to wonder not just how they survived, but how they kept their spirits from freezing too. Because warmth, here, was never only about the fire. It was about the people huddled close to it, sharing breath and story. It was the sound of laughter echoing against the stone, the press of hands near the coals, the unspoken promise that no one faced the cold alone. And in that thought, you find a quiet comfort. The castle may be cold, but the human heart then as now burns brighter than any torch. You wake to the sound of dripping water somewhere in the dark condensation sliding down a stone wall, gathering into droplets, falling with a soft, rhythmic tap. The fire in the great hall has long since dwindled to glowing coals, and the cold has crept back like a thief. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders and rise, breath misting in the air. Every step you take echoes faintly in the empty space, reminding you that you are small compared to this massive shell of stone and timber. The architecture of the castle is breathtaking, yes, but it's also a magnificent trap for cold. The very walls that inspire awe are part of a clever but merciless system. They were built to last, not to comfort. When you place your palm against one of them, you feel how the chill seeps inward like a living pulse. These stones, granite, limestone, or sandstone, depending on the region, store cold the way bread stores air. By midwinter, they radiate it steadily, sucking warmth from anybody foolish enough to stand too close. And you start to see the logic. Castles were fortresses first, homes second. They were meant to intimidate and to endure. Their builders thought of enemies, not frost. The thick walls that blunted battering rams also blocked the Sunday. The tall towers that gave archers their perfect view became frozen watchtowers in January. The moats that shimmered in summer became shallow sheets of ice, echoing the wind like low music. A mainstream historical fact. In the 12th century, many English and French castles were constructed using lime mortar, a mixture that took years to dry fully within those dense walls. It's said that even decades later, moisture could still seep out during the cold season, condensing on the surface like sweat. The result was perpetual dampness, a kind of clammy chill that no fire could fully banish. That moisture, trapped between stones, also meant that warmth had nowhere to go but vanish. The castle was less a cozy home and more an elaborate refrigerator. People didn't think in terms of insulation as we do now. They thought in terms of layers and survival. You move through the corridors, feeling drafts slide between cracks in the heavy doors. Every archway funnels the wind, a cruel bit of physics the masons didn't account for. Or perhaps they did. Ventilation was essential for smoke from torches and hearths to escape. Comfort was sacrificed for breathability. You can almost hear the medieval engineer saying, "Better cold than choking." Historians still debate whether this architectural philosophy was entirely deliberate or simply the byproduct of trial and error. Some argue that the builders were aware of the issue but accepted it as unavoidable. Others think they genuinely didn't grasp how poor their thermal design was. Either way, the result was the same: magnificent halls that felt like wind tunnels in winter. The ceiling soars above you, ribbed with beams blackened by centuries of smoke. It's beautiful in a grim, functional way. The high roof served two purposes: keeping fires from scorching the ceiling and giving heat somewhere to rise and vanish. The warmth you crave rushes upward, out of reach, gathering in the rafters where it warms only the shadows. And then there are the floors. Flagstones impressive, yes, but utterly merciless. You hear the scrape of your boots echo, and imagine the daily life of servants and guards who walked these same paths, their souls stiff with frost, their breath visible even indoors. Some castles tried to soften this problem with rushes or straw strewn across the floor like crude carpeting, but the result was messy and unhygienic. Rats loved it. Still, people preferred a few inches of straw underfoot to the icy sting of bare stone. In the private chambers, things were a little better, but not much. The floors there might be covered with woven mats or animal skins. Some even used layers of dried herbs like lavender or mint to freshen the air and discourage pests. As you step across, you can almost imagine the faint scent of crushed thyme lingering in the cold, sweet and dry. The castle's cold was not uniform. Each area had its own microclimate. The kitchens, with their roaring ovens, were stiflingly hot. The great hall stayed tolerably warm while fires burned, but the corridors and stairwells were like passageways through the Arctic. A noble might dine in relative comfort, then freeze on the walk to bed. And that bed, often placed in a separate chamber off the main hall, was its own battlefield against the cold. Walls thick as a man's height did little to stop the draughts that slithered through arrow slits or seeped between uneven stones. The narrow windows, designed for defense, doubled as natural air conditioners. Curtains and tapestries hung in folds not just for decoration but to create barriers. Every layer of fabric mattered. There's a peculiar tidbit from a 14th century household account, mentioning that some lords had their walls lined with wood panels not for beauty, but because wood held warmth like flesh. The idea was that timber, being softer than stone, trapped air and provided a mild insulating effect. It wasn't perfect, but it made the room feel a degree or two warmer. You pause by one such panel now, tracing the grain beneath your fingertips. It's smooth, varnished by age, and faintly warmer than the wall beside it. You imagine the lord of the house standing here centuries ago, hands clasped behind his back, waiting for spring. Outside, the castle's design magnifies the cold in cruel ways. The outer walls, massive, proud, nearly impregnable, also create courtyards that funnel wind. The towers catch every gust, turning the interior yard into a swirling vortex of snow and sleet. If you step outside for even a moment, the chill cuts into you like a blade. The banners crack like whips in the wind. Even the ravens look irritated, huddled on parapets with feathers puffed. But here's the paradox. This very architecture that punished its inhabitants also protected them. The stone might be cold, but it was fireproof, arrow-proof, and most importantly time-proof. That's why so many of these castles still stand. The people who built them endured winters that would break modern hearts, yet they left monuments that endure like mountains. You can almost respect the trade-off. They exchanged comfort for permanence. You settle back near the great hall's fading fire, wrapping your cloak tighter. You listen to the sigh of the wind beyond the walls and the low groan of timbers adjusting in the cold. There's a strange calm here, a feeling that you're part of something bigger and older than yourself. The chill is unpleasant, yes, but it's also grounding. It reminds you that warmth was never taken for granted. It had to be earned, built, and shared. So you sit, waiting for the first faint orange glow of dawn to slip through the arrow slits, promising another day of smoke, stone, and struggle against the cold. The dawn light barely creeps through the narrow slits in the wall, pale and reluctant, The great hall feels like a cavern after the fire dies, the cold having crept into every inch of air. Your footsteps echo softly as you move toward the hearth, where last night's embers hide beneath a thin crust of ash. A few orange sparks still flicker beneath, stubborn and alive. You kneel, stirring them gently with a poker until a glow reawakens, then feed the fire with dry wood that crackles and sighs as the flames rise again. The heart of the castle was not its throne or chapel, but the hearth. In many ways, this single square of heat was the soul of medieval life. Everyone gathered around it, from noble to servant, drawn by the same need to feel warmth seep back into their fingers. Contemporary accounts confirm that even grand banquets were often held near the largest fireplace in the hall, not merely for spectacle, but for survival. When you stand close to one of these ancient hearths, you feel its might. The stones around the fire pit are worn smooth by centuries of hands and boots. The soot-blackened mantle above it tells stories of countless winters. A roaring blaze was a mark of wealth and power because wood was not always easy to find. Forests around castles were carefully managed, and the right to gather firewood was sometimes more valuable than gold. Curiously enough, some of the largest fires in these castles were not meant to warm the room at all. They were used for cooking, boiling laundry, even brewing ale. The smoke from these fires wandered through open rafters and out holes in the roof, or at least that was the hope. You can imagine sitting in this hall, trying to eat your supper, as the air grows thick with smoke that clings to your hair and stings your eyes. In early castles, before chimneys became common, smoke simply gathered in the roof space and drifted out through a vent or louver. This worked well enough until rain or snow came through the same opening. There are records of servants having to place buckets on tables to catch drips during meals. It's an image both pitiful and charming. A feast beneath a smoky ceiling, droplets falling between trenchers and goblets. Some experts still question whether these early open halls were as unbearable as we imagine. After all, the upper air, thick with smoke, might have acted as a primitive insulation layer, keeping heat closer to the ground. Others think it was simply miserable, a compromise between warmth and suffocation. The truth is likely somewhere in between. But by the 12th and 13th centuries, innovation sparked change. Builders began experimenting with flues, stone channels that carried smoke up through the wall and out above the roofline. This was revolutionary. The first true chimneys appeared in Norman castles, allowing separate rooms to have their own fireplaces. It's hard to overstate how transformative that was. For the first time, private chambers could be heated without filling them with soot. You imagine one of those newly built rooms, a small chamber, thick tapestries on the walls, the faint roar of fire echoing through the flue. The smell of wood smoke lingers, yes, but the air is clearer, gentler. The flame dances behind an iron grate, and the glow paints ripples on the stone floor. There's an odd, rarely mentioned fact about medieval fires. They were rarely allowed to die completely. Tending the hearth was a near sacred duty. The keeper of the fire, often a servant or member of the household staff, made sure embers survived the night. Extinguishing the flame entirely was bad luck, even dangerous. To restart from cold flint each morning wasted time and risked losing the household spirit, as superstition warned. As you listen to the hiss and pop of new logs catching fire, you begin to appreciate why the hearth was so symbolic. It was life itself, a circle of light and safety in a world of stone and frost. Around it, people told stories, planned hunts, shared meals, whispered gossip. Without the fire, the castle would feel like a tomb. In the great halls of the wealthy, the size of the fire was part of their reputation. Chroniclers describe hearths wide enough to walk through and logs as thick as tree trunks. Yet, for all that spectacle, only those sitting within a few yards of the flames truly felt their heat. Farther away, the temperature dropped sharply. That's why servants and guards huddled together near doorways, wrapped in cloaks, their eyes darting toward the center where the noble family basked. Archaeological studies reveal that smoke stains still linger on rafters high above medieval hearths, a permanent reminder of their flawed design. Even today, If you stand beneath one of those old chimneys in a restored castle, you can smell it, a ghostly mix of wood, grease, and centuries of burnt oak. Yet, despite its inefficiency, the hearth remained a gathering point, a source not just of heat but of humanity. It was the one place where rank temporarily softened. You can imagine a cold night like this, the lord staring into the fire's heart, his mind lost in thought, a maid tending the kettle, a dog curled at his feet. For a few moments, all share the same fragile warmth. The fire crackles again, sending up sparks that vanish before reaching the beams. You can feel the air change, no longer biting, but almost soft, alive. Outside, the world remains encased in frost, but within this halo of orange light, there's comfort. Not everyone agrees on when fire ceased to be merely practical and became emotional, something that shaped the rhythm of medieval evenings. Some historians think it was always both, a tool and a symbol, a necessity and a ritual. The way the firelight danced across faces, the way it whispered and sighed, perhaps it reminded people of something eternal, something that could never quite be extinguished. And as you sit here now, watching the flames twist and fold like ribbons, you realize that warmth in a medieval castle was not about luxury. It was about persistence, the quiet defiance of light against endless cold. The warmth of the great hall fire fades as you wander deeper into the castle's upper chambers, following the faint curl of smoke that escapes through narrow passages. The air thickens with a bitter tang, charred wood, and something older, metallic, almost like burnt iron. It's easy to forget that medieval fireplaces were as dangerous as they were comforting. When they worked, they were blessings. When they didn't, they turned halls into choking fog banks. You climb a spiral staircase that twists like the inside of a shell, each step slick with damp. The smoke clings to the walls here too. Centuries of soot have painted them in shades of black and brown. At the top, you step into a smaller room, one of the early attempts at a private heated chamber. It feels claustrophobic, the air stale, yet faintly warm. A small fire crackles in the corner, its flame drawn uncertainly into a crude flue cut into the wall. Chimneys were revolutionary, but they were also temperamental. Records from the 13th century mention servants spending hours trying to coax a fire to draw properly, sometimes resorting to waving blankets or even standing inside the fireplace to direct airflow. The flues often twisted upward at odd angles, built by masons who were learning through trial and error. When the wind shifted, smoke poured back into the room, leaving eyes streaming and lungs burning. Curiously enough, medieval people believed that smoke had health benefits. It was said to toughen the lungs and drive away evil humors. Some even thought children who grew up in smoky rooms would be stronger. Whether this was optimism or desperation, no one can say, but the scent of wood smoke became the signature smell of winter life. Evidence from excavations at sites like Dover and Rochester suggests that early chimneys were often lined with clay tiles or thin bricks, meant to prevent the stonework from cracking under heat. But this didn't always work. Heat rose unevenly, soot built up, and sparks could ignite rafters above. Many castle fires, some catastrophic, started in these very chimneys, devouring upper floors long before anyone realized. It was a paradox. The same invention that brought warmth could just as easily bring ruin. You look up at the dark mouth of the flue above you, and it feels almost alive, breathing, shifting with the draft. The sound of wind moaning through the passage is eerie, like a whisper from somewhere deep within the walls. In winter, those sounds never ceased. They were the castle's own voice, groaning against the cold. There's an account from a 14th century steward's log describing the endless maintenance such systems required. Every winter, masons and servants had to climb onto rooftops to clear soot and blockages, often while snow fell around them. It was dirty, dangerous work, but essential. One blocked flue could fill an entire keep with smoke in minutes. Some experts today argue that medieval builders understood more about airflow than we give them credit for. The placement of windows, arrow slits, and roof vents often created a kind of primitive ventilation system. Others think it was mostly luck, a patchwork of fixes rather than a grand design. Still, standing in this room, you sense an uneasy balance between control and chaos. The smoke swirls around your head as if alive, coiling toward the flue's narrow throat. You cough, wave it away, and imagine the daily life of those who endured this. Even the nobility were not immune. Chroniclers wrote of queens retreating from smoky chambers with red-rimmed eyes, and kings ordering entire fireplaces to be rebuilt midwinter in frustration. Comfort, it seems, was a moving target. Not everyone could afford to install or maintain these systems. In smaller keeps, fires still burned in open pits, and servants hung tapestries to trap the haze higher above their heads. Some households even had designated smoke rooms, where meats and herbs were hung deliberately to make use of the perpetual haze. If you lived in a castle, you learned to live with smoke. It became as natural as the air itself. Oddly enough, some of that smoke carried a blessing in disguise. It cured wood beams, hardened plaster, and drove out insects. In a strange twist of medieval practicality, discomfort often doubled as preservation. What choked lungs also kept the castle standing. You move closer to the small hearth, staring into the orange flicker. It's easy to imagine how much patience and ritual went into lighting these fires. Flints and steels, bundles of straw, a careful breath of air. It was a quiet ceremony repeated countless times each day. Fire wasn't just heat. It was a task, a rhythm, a daily negotiation between human persistence and the untamed elements. Outside, the wind rises again, pressing against the narrow window. The flame trembles, bends sideways, then steadies. The chimney hums softly, drawing better now, the air clearing. You take a slow breath, the smoke sting fading, and realize the difference a well-built flue could make. A good chimney wasn't just a luxury, it was a miracle of survival. The people who lived here learned to read smoke like a language. The color told them what wood was burning. The way it curled revealed if the draft was strong or weak. Black smoke meant damp logs or a clogged flue. Pale blue meant heat intense enough to melt lead. Entire lives revolved around understanding this delicate dialogue. Some medieval manuscripts even include marginal notes about taming the flame. A monk writing in the margins of a prayer book once complained that smoke from the scriptorium hearth turned the pages grey and left the ink tasting bitter. The detail feels oddly human annoyance, eternal through centuries of soot. And yet, despite the endless smoke, the coughing, the risk of fire, no one could imagine life without these roaring hearths. The castle may have been a fortress of cold stone, but the hearth made it human. It transformed lifeless chambers into living spaces, even if those spaces were half choked with haze. As you turn to leave, you glance once more at the dancing flame. The smoke no longer feels like an intruder, it feels like the castle breathing, sighing with the memory of 1,000 winters survived. The fire hums faintly behind you as you return to your quarters, but even here, warmth is a fleeting guest. Your breath curls white in the dimness, and the stone walls glow faintly with reflected torchlight. You reach for the thick pile of garments laid out at the foot of your bed, a tangle of wool, linen, and fur, and begin layering them one by one. In this world, survival begins not with walls or wood, but with what you wear. Daily clothing in a medieval castle was not about fashion in winter, it was about endurance. Every thread served a purpose, every fabric, a kind of armor against the cold. Chronicles from the late Middle Ages described nobles wearing as many as 5 or 6 layers indoors. Linen shirts next to the skin, then woolen tunics, fur-lined surcoats, and finally a heavy cloak clasped at the shoulder. The goal wasn't elegance, it was insulation. Records from monastic inventories reveal that even monks, those paragons of simplicity, had special winter habits, thick cowls and padded sandals granted by seasonal rule. Their plain austerity bent under the weight of practicality. You can almost see them huddled in their cloisters, their robes brushing the cold stone floors as they move like quiet shadows. A curious detail appears in household roles from the 13th century. Women of status sometimes lined their gowns with squirrel fur, specifically the soft belly fur of northern varieties known as vair. It wasn't just luxurious, it trapped air in a way that made it remarkably warm. When you think of the glittering portraits of queens in shimmering robes, imagine beneath them a hidden lining of tiny pelts, stitched together in neat blue-grey rows. Some experts still question whether fur truly made such a dramatic difference, or whether its symbolic power, the visible proof of wealth, was more important. But anyone who's ever stood in an unheated room in February would agree it must have helped. Wool was the real hero, though. In medieval Europe, it was everywhere, spun, woven, and tailored into every imaginable shape. The smell of lanolin, that natural grease clinging to untreated wool, gave garments a faint animal scent and water resistance. It kept the damp at bay and warmth trapped close to the skin. Linen, by contrast, felt clean and light, but in winter it was simply the underlayer, the quiet mediator between body and wool. You slip your arm through a sleeve and hear the faint rasp of coarse fabric brushing against itself. Each movement carries sound like dry leaves in wind. The wool is heavy, pressing comfortingly against you, and for the first time all morning you stop shivering. In wealthier homes, the art of dressing for warmth became elaborate. Nobles collected imported furs, ermine from Scandinavia, fox from Russia, and even lynx pelts from Central Europe. To wear such things wasn't just to stay warm, it was to declare that winter itself could be tamed by your fortune. For servants and guards, warmth came from simpler means: layered homespun wool and patched cloaks mended year after year until they resembled maps of wear and survival. It's almost poetic how clothing became a language of endurance. Even the way garments fastened had a purpose. Laces, ties, and belts allowed heat to be sealed in or loosened as needed. In the dead of night, when the temperature plunged, people might even sleep in their day clothes, wrapping a cloak over the top. Pajamas, as you know them, were centuries away. Contemporary accounts from travelers describe the sound of sleeping quarters at night, the soft rustle of wool, the creak of bed frames, the occasional sneeze from someone wrapped too tightly. Fire rarely reached those upper chambers, so bodies themselves became furnaces. Couples slept pressed together, servants piled near the hearth, and children nested beneath their parents' cloaks. There's a lesser-known custom worth imagining. Before bed, many households heated stones in the fire and slipped them into metal or ceramic containers, which were then wrapped in cloth and placed between sheets. These primitive bed warmers radiated heat for hours, though they sometimes scorched linen or startled sleepers when they cooled suddenly. You might think of it as the ancestor of your modern hot water bottle, only heavier and riskier. As you fasten the last clasp of your cloak, you notice how every layer carries its own texture. The soft nap of wool, the slick smoothness of fur, the faint prickle where the thread rubs against skin. Warmth here is tactile. It lives in the feel of fabric, not the air around you. A few modern historians suggest that medieval people developed thicker skin literally and figuratively. Repeated exposure to cold hardened them in ways that might seem unimaginable now. Frostbite was common, but tolerance grew. A chronicler from Burgundy once bragged that his lord's soldiers could sleep on frozen ground as easily as on feather beds. Whether this is bravado or truth, it captures the spirit of the age. Endurance was honor. At the same time, layers carried meaning. A servant's coarse tunic marked his place in the world as clearly as a knight's gilded mantle. The colder the climate, the clearer the hierarchy. Some shivered, others shone. Yet, even the richest lord, wrapped in his imported fox pelts, could not escape the bite of January, when the wind swept through the tower stair. You draw your hood up and look out a narrow window, the world beyond smothered in white. Snowflakes drift through the slit, carried by a mischievous gust. You can smell iron and smoke on the air, the scent of winter's breath mingling with yesterday's fire. Dressing becomes ritual. Each morning begins with the same slow process: shirt, hose, tunic, surcoat, cloak. Each layer feels like an act of defiance against the world outside. In that repetition, there's comfort, a rhythm older than any prayer. And as you glance toward the dying fire, you realize something subtle. Warmth in this world is never constant. It's earned, gathered, and guarded, just like faith or loyalty. To live through the cold meant to respect it, to understand that even stone and silk bowed before winter's rule. You flex your hands inside your wool gloves, the coarse fibers scratching faintly at your skin, and feel the faintest pulse of heat within. You're ready to face another day of frost, wrapped in the quiet triumph of fabric and endurance. The corridor narrows as you walk toward the sleeping chambers. The torch is dimmer here, the air thick with quiet. The sound of your boots softens, rushes underfoot muffle every step. You push open a heavy wooden door, and the cold meets you like a wall, sharp, dry, almost personal in its hostility. This is where the night was endured rather than enjoyed. Medieval bedrooms, especially in stone castles, were not the warm sanctuaries we imagine today. They were chambers of endurance, often small, draughty, and unheated once the evening fire died. By morning, frost decorated the walls in delicate veils, and water in the basins turned solid overnight. Chroniclers noted that ink froze in wells, and breath left thin crystals on bed curtains. Comfort was a temporary illusion, one achieved through creativity rather than luxury. You step closer to the bed. It's enormous, high enough that you'd need a stool to climb in. The frame creaks faintly when you touch it, wood polished by generations. Beneath the canopy hang thick drapes of wool and velvet, the medieval answer to insulation. Pull them closed, and you trap a small pocket of air, warmer than the chill beyond. It's like building a tent inside your own room, a private refuge in a sea of cold stone. Historical records from household accounts show that such beds were prized possessions, often more valuable than the land on which the house stood. Feathers, wool, straw, every filling told a story of status. The wealthiest nobles slept on feather mattresses stuffed thick enough to sink into, while servants made do with straw pallets on the floor. Even so, everyone shared one thing: layers upon layers of bedding, blankets of linen and fur, quilts of heavy cloth, and sometimes even cloaks thrown across for extra weight. Curiously, many families and their attendants shared beds, not always for affection, but for survival. The combined warmth of bodies created the most effective heating system known in the Middle Ages. Travelers' diaries mention strangers sleeping side by side in inns, a practice accepted without shame. Warmth was communal. Privacy was a luxury that could wait until spring. A particularly odd detail survives from a 15th century English inventory describing bed companions hired for elderly nobles' servants, chosen for their health and youth, to sleep near their masters on cold nights. It sounds strange now, but back then, body heat was as practical a resource as firewood. In a world of scarcity, nothing warm was wasted. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of the richest lords had their bed frames lined with iron warming pans, small trays filled with embers, slid beneath the sheets before sleep. The faint hiss of hot metal on linen, the smell of ash and smoke, the brief bliss of radiant heat, all of it gone within an hour. There was a risk, too. One careless move could set the bedding alight. Records of such fires, though rare, still appear in manorial rolls, a grim reminder that warmth and danger were constant companions. Not everyone agrees on how effective these measures were. Some historians believe the bed curtains and layered quilts genuinely kept temperatures tolerable. Others argue that most nights were spent half-frozen regardless. But you can imagine it, the hush inside that curtained cocoon, candlelight flickering through heavy fabric, the whisper of wind outside, muffled to a distant hum. You climb onto the high bed now, pulling aside the curtain. The mattress dips beneath your weight, soft but uneven. The sheets are cool to the touch at first, shocking even, but the warmth of your body begins to bloom slowly through the layers. The scent of the bedding is earthy, a mix of wool, dried lavender, and faint smoke from the fireplace below. Someone placed a sprig of herbs beneath the pillow, part superstition, part deodorizer. Medieval people were fond of such small comforts. They stuffed mattresses with dried rushes mixed with mint or sage, believing the fragrance kept away illness. A few even sprinkled wine on the sheets to purify them, a curious ritual that probably made the room smell more festive than sanitary. You lie back, staring at the canopy above. It's embroidered with faded patterns, fleur-de-lis perhaps, or hunting scenes long gone soft with age. The bed creaks faintly with each breath, and beyond the curtains you hear the faint sounds of the castle settling, timbers shifting, the wind humming down the chimney, footsteps echoing somewhere far below. In winter, sleep came early and stayed long. Nights stretched endlessly, and without clocks or lamps, people often woke in the darkness, whispered prayers, or shared quiet talk before drifting back again. Some scholars call it segmented sleep, a rhythm of slumber broken into two halves by a watchful interlude. During that time, lovers might talk softly, servants stoke the hearth, or travellers whisper stories to one another in the dark. You imagine that silence now, the gentle rustle of blankets, the faint crackle of a dying fire, the slow breathing of someone asleep nearby. There's peace in it, a peace born not of comfort, but of acceptance. And yet, even here, danger lurked in the cold. Poor ventilation and damp air caused what physicians of the time called winter fevers. People huddled so close to fires that their faces blistered while their backs froze. Remedies included spiced wine, heated stones, and amulets blessed by priests. Some believed sleeping near an open flame invited wandering spirits. Others thought the fire itself was holy protection. One court physician of the 14th century wrote that to sleep cold is to wake dull of wit, advising his noble patients to keep their chambers as temperate as spring. Easy to say when your windows are wide enough to whistle. As you pull the curtain shut again, sealing yourself in the dark, you understand something profound. Warmth in this world was not a state, it was a chase. It slipped away each night and had to be hunted again each morning, like light itself. The sheets rustle softly as you turn. The mattress sighs. Somewhere beyond the canopy, the wind moans through the battlements, an ancient song of persistence. You close your eyes, and the cold doesn't vanish, but it becomes something manageable, something shared by everyone who ever lived behind these walls. And for a fleeting moment, you almost understand how they did it, how they endured, not just through ingenuity, but through rhythm, through ritual, through the quiet understanding that even in the harshest cold, sleep still comes. The next morning arrives grey and reluctant, a mist hanging low over the courtyard like a shroud. You wake to the familiar chill creeping into your bones again, despite the heavy bedding. Your fingers are stiff as you push aside the bed curtains and step onto the cold flagstones. The first breath of air bites at your nose, sharp, clean, and unforgiving. You glance toward the narrow slit of a window, where faint light filters through, soft but icy. The windows of a medieval castle are a marvel of contradiction. They were meant for defense, not comfort. Those narrow openings designed to allow arrows to fly out but not in let-in drafts as effectively as they kept out enemies. Even the grander halls with larger apertures had to contend with the same problem. Glass was rare, expensive, and fragile. Most of the time, these openings were covered with something else entirely. Records from the 12th century show that only the wealthiest households could afford true glass windows, and even then, the panes were small, set together with strips of lead in diamond shapes. The glass itself was rarely clear, it shimmered with waves and bubbles, catching sunlight like ripples on water. Pretty to look at, but useless for insulation. Heat seeped out as easily as candle smoke. For the rest of society, windows were sealed with horn, parchment, or oiled cloth, ingenious solutions, though far from perfect. Cow horn, scraped thin until translucent, gave a faint milky glow to the rooms. When sunlight passed through it, The effect was soft and golden, almost soothing. But at night, the same horn turned brittle, and wind pushed right through its seams. In many castles, shutters were the true defense against the cold. Heavy wooden panels swung closed each evening and were barred tight. When you walk closer to the window now, you can see the marks of the iron hinge, blackened by years of use. You unbolt it carefully and push open the shutter. The blast of air that greets you is brutal, slicing across your face with the raw scent of snow and wood smoke. Outside, the courtyard is blanketed in white. The stables smoke faintly with the breath of horses. Somewhere, a bell tolls for morning prayers. You close the shutter quickly, the thud echoing through the quiet chamber. Some antiquarians point out that window seats, those cozy nooks built into castle walls, were not for romance as much as survival. The deep alcoves created by thick walls offered a small refuge from drafts. People sat in them wrapped in furs, reading, sewing, or watching the grey world beyond, careful to stay within that narrow band of tolerable air. You run your hand along the stone there, smooth, cool, a surface that has known both fingertips and frost. Curiously enough, nobles sometimes hung small curtains or draped fabrics across the window recesses, not to block light, but to trap warmth. It's a detail easily missed in paintings, the folds of velvet or wool drawn tight across the frame, a primitive yet effective form of insulation. And yet, for all these measures, the cold found its way in. The walls themselves breathed. Moisture condensed on stone, froze overnight, then melted by day, creating a cycle that never ended. The only true remedy was sunlight, and in winter there was precious little of that. Some experts remain divided about whether medieval builders truly understood heat retention. There's evidence that later castles, especially in southern England and France, began incorporating more enclosed spaces and smaller window openings specifically to reduce drafts. Others argue it was simply a side effect of improved military design rather than comfort. Whatever the reason, the pattern is clear. As centuries passed, castles became marginally cozier, but never warm by modern standards. You sit by the window now, watching your breath cloud and fade in the air. You can almost imagine a lady of the castle doing the same, her embroidery spread across her lap, fingers half numb, a candle burning beside her. She would pause often, not from distraction, but to warm her hands above the tiny flame. The wax would drip, pooling on the sill. The world outside would remain distant, muffled by the storm. The oiled parchment covering the upper slit of the window flutters faintly. The scent of tallow from the candle mingles with the smell of cold stone. Every sense reminds you that warmth here is something negotiated, never guaranteed. Even the light feels tired, as though winter has bled its strength. A rarely mentioned practice from northern castles was the use of window boards, slabs of leather or wood wrapped in cloth, wedged into gaps to block the worst of the drafts. Some were even painted or embroidered to blend with the wall hangings. You can imagine the quiet satisfaction of tucking them in place at dusk, sealing the castle like a ship before a storm. You run your fingers along the edge of the shutter again. The wood is scarred, but sturdy. Imagine the hundreds of hands that closed it before you. Maids, squires, nobles, all performing the same simple ritual. The act itself feels timeless. Close out the wind, keep the warmth within. Yet, there was a poetic irony in these frozen windows. While they failed to keep out the cold, they let people glimpse the beauty of winter, the silver sheen of snow, the dark tracery of trees against the sky, the candlelight reflected in ice. One medieval poet wrote that the frost gilds the pane finer than any craftsman, a sentiment born perhaps from someone too cold to do anything but admire it. You draw the shutter closed once more, fasten the bolt, and sit back in the half-light. The faint glow through the horn panel softens the edges of the room, turning the walls to gold and shadow. For a moment, it feels almost peaceful, as though the world outside has been paused just for you. And as you pull your cloak tighter, you realize something simple yet profound. The people of this age did not fight the cold, they lived beside it, learned from it, and wove it into their days like thread into cloth. Every window, every curtain, every breath of air told the same quiet story of endurance. The castle holds that story still, in every draught that brushes your cheek, every whisper of wind through horn and shutter, a reminder that warmth is sweetest only when it's hard won. Your fingers have barely thawed from closing the shutters when you notice something small and practical resting on a side table, an object so modest it might go unnoticed. It's a brass sphere, perforated like a honeycomb, sitting atop three tiny legs. When you lift it, it's heavier than it looks. Inside, ash, and faintly glowing embers still smoulder, a medieval hand warmer. In a castle where grand fireplaces warmed the noble and damp corridors tormented the servant, these portable devices were salvation. They were small, clever, and surprisingly elegant, passed from hand to hand like little sons. When the great hall fire couldn't follow you, you carried a spark of it instead. Archaeologists have uncovered examples of such warmers in castles across Europe, round or rectangular boxes of metal, often brass or iron, with ornate carvings that allowed heat to escape. Charcoal or coals were placed inside, sometimes on a bed of ash to reduce smoke. The heat was gentle, lasting hours, and easily replenished. The rich lined the handles with wood or leather, so they wouldn't scorch their palms. It's strange to think that such a simple device could make the difference between comfort and misery. Imagine a lady of the court, fingers stiff with cold, clasping one of these glowing orbs while she reads or embroiders. The faint warmth would creep into her hands, her sleeves steaming slightly from the heat beneath. For travelers, it was a pocket hearth, a reminder that civilization could be carried, glowing softly, through the dark. But hand warmers were not alone in their ingenuity. You look toward the floor and see another medieval innovation, the foot stove, a small wooden box, vented on top, filled with embers and set beneath chairs or under blankets. Carriage passengers, churchgoers, and noblewomen alike used them. It's said that during long winter masses, even priests relied on these humble contraptions to keep from freezing mid-sermon. Curiously, some households gave these devices names. A French noblewoman's diary from the 15th century mentions her little companion, a silver hand warmer shaped like a dove. She wrote about feeding it coals in the morning, the way one might care for a pet. There's something deeply human about that, a relationship with warmth itself, intimate and affectionate. Not everyone approved of such indulgence, though. Records from monastic orders suggest that portable warmers were frowned upon in religious life. Cold, one abbot wrote, is the rightful companion of humility. Still, you can imagine a monk, sleeves pulled over his fingers, glancing enviously at a noble's glittering brazier. Over time, these small tools became symbols of refinement as much as necessity. Some were crafted of silver and engraved with family crests, others painted with scenes of saints or hunts. The poor made do with clay pots or heated stones wrapped in cloth, less elegant but just as effective. In a world where every ember mattered, invention was democratized by need. The faint scent of ash lingers in the room as you hold the hand warmer close. The heat is subtle, more suggestion than sensation, but it's enough. You can feel how these devices must have changed the rhythm of life. They allowed people to move, to read, to work without the constant paralysis of cold. Some historians argue that this simple technology influenced architecture itself. By the late Middle Ages, smaller chambers and alcoves became more common, designed to trap the heat of braziers and portable stoves. The idea of personal warmth localized, intimate, shifted the way spaces were used. Others claim it was mere coincidence, the result of evolving privacy among the nobility. Whatever the cause, the connection between comfort and innovation began here, glowing quietly in a brass box. You imagine carrying one through the castle corridors, your hand wrapped around its smooth surface, the faint warmth bleeding into your skin. The torches flicker against the walls as you pass. Your footsteps echo in rhythm with the faint clink of metal. Every breath you exhale steams in the cold air, yet you feel almost secure, protected by your own little sphere of heat. In the servants' quarters, similar devices smoulder in the corners, though cruder and blackened by use. A group of women sit mending clothes, their laughter soft, each resting chilled fingers over the shared brazier. A child leans close, eyes wide at the orange glow. For them, warmth isn't luxury, it's communion. One of the more surprising details mentioned in travelers' accounts is how portable heat became part of social etiquette. Offering someone a hand warmer during conversation was considered a gesture of kindness, even flirtation. Imagine the intimacy of it, passing warmth from one hand to another, the faint scent of metal and smoke mingling with perfume and breath. The room around you hums faintly now, the castle walls no longer quite so hostile. You set the little brazier back on the table, watching the last ember wink at you before fading. The cold begins to creep in again almost immediately, but something about it feels softer, less cruel. You realize that in this world, people didn't just battle the cold, they negotiated with it. Every tool, every object, every ember was a truce between nature and human will. A fragile agreement that warmth could exist, if only for a while. And as the last curl of smoke drifts upward, you can almost hear the unspoken gratitude that must have filled these rooms, a sigh of relief, a whisper of thanks, every time a spark caught and stayed alive. The morning sun slants through the narrow, horn-covered window, weak and watery, painting the stone floor in stripes of pale gold. You wrap your cloak around you and climb the winding staircase that leads to the upper chambers, the noble floors. Here, the cold changes character. It's not just biting anymore. It feels proud, aloof, as though the higher you climb, the more the air forgets to carry warmth. Status had its price in a medieval castle. The great lords and ladies lived above everyone else, literally, while their servants occupied the lower floors where the kitchens and storerooms radiated faint heat. To be elevated meant prestige, but it also meant exposure. You can almost feel the irony. The richer you were, the colder your nights became. Contemporary accounts describe how nobles fought the chill with every advantage. Money could buy massive fireplaces, fur-lined furniture, thick rugs, and canopies that transformed beds into miniature fortresses. Yet none of it truly conquered the cold. In winter, even royal chambers could drop to freezing. Candles flickered and guttered, tapestries swayed from unseen draughts, and breath hung in the air like whispers. A chronicler at Windsor Castle once noted that His Majesty's upper room was fair but ill-tempered in the wind. The phrasing feels almost polite, ill-tempered, as though the chamber itself were a moody companion, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel. You can imagine the king staring irritably at the flickering fire, wrapping his mantle tighter, muttering about the warmth below in the kitchens. Curiously, nobles rarely descended to those warmer levels. It was a matter of dignity as much as practicality. To dine, sleep, or linger near the servants' hearths was to blur the social order. Warmth, like everything else, was stratified. The low-born baked beside the fire, the high-born froze beneath silk. And yet, the upper floors carried beauty. The sunlight, when it did appear, struck these chambers first, pouring through coloured glass or oiled parchment and casting patterns on the walls. During the short winter days, courtiers followed these moving rays like cats, drifting from one patch of warmth to the next. Some architectural historians suggest that castles were deliberately designed so that the lord's rooms faced the morning sun, a symbolic gesture of divine favour. Others think it was simply a happy coincidence. But when you stand here now, in this high chamber bathed in fragile light, you can sense both logic and poetry at play. You move closer to the fireplace, a smaller, more ornate one than those below. Its mantel is carved with vines and beasts, its hearth lined with glazed tiles that reflect the faint shimmer of flame. The smoke rises smoothly this time, Whoever built this flue knew their craft. The warmth, though modest, spreads evenly through the space. Still, the air remains thin. You can feel drafts trickling from the arrow slits behind tapestries, tiny rivers of cold that no decoration can fully dam. A servant might come in soon to draw the curtains tighter, tucking them behind carved benches, muttering under her breath about the foolishness of rich men and their lofty rooms. A rather overlooked feature of these upper chambers was their flooring. Unlike the bare flagstones below, many were covered with planks of oak or pine. It was not just for beauty or acoustics, it was a defense against the cold that seeped up through the masonry. Beneath those boards, straw or dried moss might be packed as crude insulation. When you step across it, the sound changes a low, wooden thud rather than a hollow echo. It's the sound of wealth trying to imitate warmth. You pause by the window seat, where a fur throw lies draped. The fur is dark, perhaps fox or wolf, its surface still glossy after centuries of use. You run your fingers along it and can almost picture the lady of the house sitting here, gazing down at her snow-covered lands. The world below would seem distant, silent, perhaps comforting in its stillness. Not everyone agrees that nobles suffered more from the cold than their servants. Some argue that privilege provided enough layers literally and socially to offset discomfort. Yet the written laments of kings, queens, and courtiers suggest otherwise. The poet Christine de Pizan once described winter in a castle as a season of sighs, when the fire mocks by warmth half given. That image lingers, the idea that even in abundance, people still felt the sting of lack. As you stand near the fire, a faint crack echoes through the chamber, the sound of timber contracting in the cold. The castle speaks in such moments, a groan here, a sigh there, as if the whole structure stretches its stone shoulders against the frost. You realize that heat doesn't simply vanish here. It migrates, hides, finds refuge in corners where it can survive a few moments longer. There's a small writing desk by the wall, its surface crowded with parchments and quills. You can imagine someone sitting here centuries ago, huddled in a cloak, hands trembling as they wrote letters by candlelight. The ink, thickened by cold, would drag across the page, perhaps a note to a distant friend, lamenting the endless winter, or a line of poetry about snow that never melts. You sit in that same spot now, watching your breath rise in thin curls. The air smells of wax and smoke, of age and waiting. For a fleeting moment, you can feel the strange beauty in it all, the marriage of luxury and hardship, of power humbled by weather. A modern mind might wonder why they endured it, why not move lower, closer to warmth. But for them, height meant authority. The cold was simply the tax of nobility, a price paid for the view, for proximity to heaven, for separation from the common flame. Outside, the wind gathers again, sweeping across the battlements. You hear its hollow song through the slits in the wall, a melody that has never ceased since these stones were first laid. You draw closer to the fire, holding out your hands, and watch the light dance over the tiles. The warmth here is a ghost of summer, faint, fleeting, but enough. And you think, perhaps that's how the people of this world lived, not expecting to conquer winter, but to outlast it. Every breath, every ember, every inch of sunlight was a quiet victory. The cold might own the castle, but the people owned their persistence. The echo of your footsteps softens as you descend once more, winding down into the belly of the castle where light grows dim and air grows dense. The scent changes to less of frost, more of smoke and something earthy, familiar. You pass through a low archway and suddenly, warmth brushes your face like a gentle hand. The kitchens. Here, the heart of the castle beats differently. Fire isn't decoration, it's survival and labor. Great brick hearths stretch across the walls, each large enough to roast a whole boar. Copper pots hang on hooks, blackened by decades of use. The room hums with quiet life voices of cooks, the clatter of knives, the steady hiss of boiling broth. The air is thick with heat and spice, and for the first time in hours, your breath doesn't turn white. Contemporary household accounts describe castle kitchens as both miracle and chaos. They provided warmth, food, and life itself, but also danger. Open flames danced beside barrels of oil. Sparks leapt into straw baskets. One inattentive servant could turn comfort into catastrophe. Even so, everyone sought excuses to linger here in winter. Servants lost errands. Guards volunteered for deliveries. Warmth was worth a little scolding. A lesser-known detail about castle kitchens is their ingenious layout. Builders often placed them on the lowest floors or in separate wings, not just to prevent fires from spreading, but to channel heat upward. Stone flues and vents carried warm air through corridors, gently raising the temperature of the rooms above. You can still feel it now, the faint pulse of warmth beneath your boots, like the castle's hidden bloodstream. Scholars disagree on whether this system was intentional design or lucky accident. Some architectural historians believe medieval masons understood airflow better than we credit them for. Others argue that any heat rising to upper floors was a mere byproduct of endless cooking. But either way, the result was the same. The servant's domain became the castle's quiet furnace. You watch as a cook tends a massive cauldron suspended over the flames. The liquid within bubbles and sighs, sending up bursts of steam that fog your vision. When she stirs, the scent of onions, herbs, and something savory fills the room. Food here wasn't only sustenance, it was warmth you could taste. It's easy to see why the kitchen became a haven. Servants drying their hands by the fire, a hound curled beneath the table, a boy sneaking bites of bread while pretending to polish spoons. The heat softened everyone's mood, blurred rank and roll. You can almost hear laughter ripple through the haze. There's a curious entry in the household book of the Duke of Lancaster, around 1380, noting that the kitchen fire shall be maintained day and night, even when no meal is prepared. The order wasn't about convenience, it was about survival. Those great hearths radiated steady heat, preventing frost from creeping too deep into the lower stones. The castle itself relied on its kitchen as much as its guards. You move toward one of the smaller hearths, where flat stones rest near the embers. Bread is baking there, slow and fragrant, its crust darkening to gold. A young girl fans the coals carefully, her cheeks flushed with heat. You crouch beside her, feeling the warmth kiss your skin, the relief immediate and whole. The cook notices and grins, motioning for you to sit. She pours a ladle of thick stew into a wooden bowl, peas, barley, bits of salted meat, the humble meal of the working class. When you taste it, the heat blooms in your chest, simple and perfect. In this place, food and fire blur together. They both keep you alive. Curiously enough, some of the earliest medieval recipes call for spices like ginger, cinnamon, and pepper, not for flavor alone, but for their perceived warming properties. Physicians of the time believed that hot ingredients balanced the body's humors during winter. A rich stew seasoned with pepper wasn't just indulgence, it was medicine. Around you, the kitchen thrums with rhythm, knives on wood, iron against stone, spoons scraping bowls, the music of daily life. The cooks move with practiced grace, their sleeves rolled high, faces shining with sweat. One tends a spit, turning a haunch of venison that hisses as its fat drips into the fire. Another kneads dough, her hands moving in steady, comforting circles. Somewhere deeper in the room, you hear the hum of voices, perhaps gossip, perhaps song. This was the castle's beating heart, the place where warmth began each day and spread outward like ripples in water. And yet, not all corners of this world were equally bright. Beyond the main hearths, the scullery waits damp, shadowed, its warmth fading fast. Servants there scrub pots in cold water until their fingers ache. You step through the doorway and feel the shift instantly. The heat vanishes, replaced by damp chill and the metallic scent of iron. The contrast is startling, almost cruel. A few paces decide whether you shiver or sweat. It reminds you how precarious warmth was in this age. It wasn't evenly shared, it pooled, shifted, was stolen and hoarded. The cooks glowed in their firelit haven, while the guards above might freeze in their watchtowers. Comfort was as stratified as class itself. Still, in this kitchen, all of that feels far away. The firelight gilds the walls, turning soot into gold. You watch the cook ladle out portions for the servants who've finished their morning duties, each bowl steaming in the cold air. The way they huddle close, laughing between spoonfuls, its warmth in its purest form, unspoken, communal. Some historians claim that this sense of shared survival, born from the fire's glow, was what held medieval households together. Loyalty wasn't only forged in war or service, it grew here, over boiling pots and shared bread. As you lean back, letting the heat soak through your cloak, you understand. For all its grandeur, a castle without its kitchen would have been a tomb of ice. Here, in the hum of labor and the glow of the fire, life persisted, not grand, not royal, but human. And when you finally rise to leave, brushing ash from your sleeves, the warmth lingers on your skin like a memory. You carry it with you into the colder halls, a reminder that every ember, no matter how small, has the power to defy the frost. The scent of the kitchen still clings to your cloak as you step into the next corridor, a mix of smoke, spice, and something faintly sweet. Your stomach hums with the echo of stew, but your hands, once warm, begin to cool again. The air above the kitchens is different, heavy with lingering heat but already thinning as it rises. You follow that faint warmth like a trail, winding upward through the service stairway until you reach the great hall once more. There, the smell of roasted meat and wine lingers like a memory, even though the feasting has long ended. In the medieval world, food was more than nourishment. It was defense against hunger, yes, but also against the cold. Every meal carried purpose, every spice an intention. The body was seen as a furnace, and what you fed it determined whether the fire within would burn bright or fade to ash. Physicians of the time, followers of Galen's ancient theory of the four humours, believed that balance was the secret to health. Cold and damp were the enemies of life. To counter them, one must eat hot and dry foods, roasted meats, spices and wine infused with warmth. Bread baked in the hearth's embers was medicine. Mulled wine wasn't a luxury, it was prescribed. Records from royal households describe winter banquets where every dish was designed to heat the blood. Pottage thickened with barley, spiced with pepper and saffron, venison roasted over coals, basted with wine, even desserts seasoned with cinnamon and nutmeg. Imported spices were worth their weight in gold, not only for flavor but for the illusion of summer they carried in every bite. And yet, it wasn't only the rich who ate for warmth. In the servants' quarters, simpler meals carried the same philosophy. Bowls of hot porridge, cabbage stews, and endless bread soaked in broth, all meant to keep the cold from biting too deeply. You imagine a tired maid crouching by the fire, blowing on her spoon, eyes half closed in quiet relief. The warmth wasn't just on her tongue, it spread inward, slow and steady, like hope. Curiously enough, there are records of heating herbs used in everyday cooking: ginger, mustard seed, garlic, and horseradish. These ingredients, though modest, were prized for their power to stir the blood and wake the spirit. Even ale and mead were considered fortifying, best consumed warm. Some medieval brewers made winter ales with honey and spices, believing they strengthened both courage and digestion. It's tempting to laugh now, but the logic was sound. Without modern insulation, heating, or even proper ventilation, a full stomach was often the only reliable source of heat. After a long day spent in icy corridors or guard posts, the first sip of hot soup must have felt like salvation. You take a seat near the great hall hearth, still faintly warm from the night before. The stone retains the heat like a sleeping animal, radiating it softly. You imagine this same scene centuries ago. The lord and his household gathered for supper, torches flaring, dogs waiting at their feet, the air humming with the scent of roasted boar and spiced wine. A chronicler from Burgundy once remarked that fire and feast were the same word in winter. The meaning is poetic and true. To eat was to affirm life against the encroaching dark. Each course was an act of defiance. Each swallow a quiet rebellion against the cold. You picture the servants bustling behind the scenes, carrying trays, ladling soups, refilling goblets. The lords laugh, their breath visible in the torchlight. Somewhere, a minstrel plucks a lute, his fingers red but determined. The sound mingles with the crackle of fire, creating a rhythm as ancient as survival itself. Some historians still puzzle over how much the diet of the wealthy actually helped them endure the cold. Rich foods, heavy and spiced, offered psychological warmth as much as physical. Yet, for peasants and soldiers, the reality was far simpler. Keep the pot boiling. There's evidence that castle garrisons kept a communal cauldron simmering day and night, into which scraps of bread, grain, and meat were tossed continually, a living stew that evolved as the week went on. It's easy to romanticize such meals, but they were acts of endurance. The broth grew richer, yes, but also stranger. Imagine the layers of flavor, of time itself, folded into that one pot, a tangible history of survival. And then there was wine, mulled, spiced, steaming its scent alone enough to warm the soul. Recipes from the 14th century describe Ipocras, a sweetened wine infused with cinnamon, ginger, and cloves, strained through cloth and served hot. Physicians swore it could revive even the weakest constitution. You take an imaginary sip now, and the warmth spreads through your chest, the spice biting gently at the tongue. Not everyone agreed on these remedies, though. Some scholars warned that too much heat within could overdry the humours and cause fever. Others claimed cold was a necessary teacher, a purifier that built endurance. The debate itself feels eternal, whether comfort weakens or strengthens us. You smile at the thought how little human nature changes, even after centuries. The fire beside you snaps suddenly, sending up a spray of sparks. You watch them rise and vanish against the dark stone chimney. Around you, the echoes of long-ago feasts seem to whisper the clatter of plates, the laughter of those who, like you, once sought warmth in food and company. Perhaps that's what winter was really about in these walls, not just staying alive, but staying connected. Each meal, each shared cup, was a reminder that warmth was stronger when shared. As you stand, the warmth from the hearth clings to you a little longer, wrapping you in an invisible cloak. You step away, back into the corridor where frost still claims the edges of the stones, but the cold feels easier now. Inside you, something burns quietly, a borrowed heat from stew, fire, and fellowship. And for the first time since this journey began, you understand. In a medieval castle, the surest way to fight the cold wasn't with wood or fur, it was with the small, steady flame that lived in every shared meal, every story told by the fire, every moment of warmth passed from one heart to another. By late afternoon, the castle hums with a quieter rhythm. Fires are tended, torches are lit, and the long shadows of the courtyard stretch into the halls. You follow the faint echo of voices and the scent of steam down a side passage you haven't yet explored. The air here is warmer and wetter, thick with an unfamiliar sweetness. Then you hear it a splash, followed by laughter muffled by stone. You've found the bathhouse. Medieval bathing, contrary to popular myth, was not absent, it was a luxury. In castles large enough to boast their own bathhouse, the act of washing was both cleansing and comforting. The room before you glows with flickering lamplight reflected in shallow pools. The air shimmers faintly with heat. Steam curls against the low ceiling, turning the cold stone into a living cloud. In some noble households, the bath was more ceremony than hygiene. A servant would stoke the fire beneath a copper cauldron, filling the wooden tub with a mix of warm water, herbs, and sometimes even wine. Chronicles from the 14th century describe these scented baths as a joy of the flesh and a cure of the soul. You lean closer and catch the faint smell of rosemary and mint plants, known not only for their fragrance, but for their supposed power to chase away winter's humours. Contemporary inventories tell us that even smaller castles kept bathing tubs, usually round, bound with iron hoops, and lined with linen for comfort. Nobles often shared them with family or companions. Privacy was less a virtue than companionship. Picture a lord sinking into a steaming tub, while servants pour heated water over his shoulders. The flicker of candles glows on the water's surface, and for one blissful hour, the world outside the snow, the wind, the stone ceases to exist. Curiously enough, in parts of France and Bohemia, castles had rooms with hollow floors warmed from below by channels carrying hot air from adjacent kitchens or furnaces, a crude but effective form of radiant heating. This technology echoed ancient Roman hypocausts, surviving in pockets where the memory of empire lingered. Some scholars believe these sweating rooms were the medieval link between Roman baths and modern saunas. Whether deliberate imitation or accidental rediscovery, the warmth here feels deeply human heat meant to heal. You step closer to one of the wooden tubs, its rim damp, the water inside still faintly steaming. Someone has left a bundle of towels beside it, along with a jar of oil infused with herbs. When you dip your fingers into the water, it's perfectly tempered, not hot, not cold, but the exact warmth of the body itself. For a moment, you understand why bathhouses became sanctuaries. Yet not everyone shared this comfort. Many castles lacked the means or the will to heat such spaces. Water was hauled laboriously from wells or rivers, and in winter, that task was an act of bravery. You can almost hear the grumbling of servants lugging buckets through frozen courtyards, their breath sharp in the air, hands raw from rope and frost. Still, they did it because even one warm bath a month was a treasure. There's an overlooked anecdote from the court of Edward II describing how the king's barber was also responsible for preparing the royal baths. His duties included warming the chamber, laying cloths about the tub, and perfuming the water with sweet herbs. The combination of bathing and fragrance was thought to fortify both body and spirit. In an age before medicine as we know it, warmth itself was a treatment. You listen to the soft drip of condensation falling from the ceiling into the water. The sound is hypnotic. You can almost imagine the hush of voices, the gentle splash of water against the tub's edge, the way steam blurs faces, until all look equal. Here, perhaps, rank dissolved as easily as dirt. A few religious chroniclers disapproved of such luxury, calling frequent bathing a temptation of the flesh. But even monks, for all their vows of austerity, made exceptions in winter. Abbey records show scheduled bath days once every 2 weeks, sometimes more especially for the elderly. The line between piety and practicality grew very thin when the temperature dropped below freezing. The warmth of the bath was fleeting but profound. It loosened muscles, thawed stiff fingers, and gave people a glimpse of paradise in a season that often felt like penance. Imagine stepping out of the water, skin flushed, wrapped in linen warmed by the fire. The shock of cold air outside would sting, yes, but it would also remind you you're alive. Some experts argue that communal bathing was as much social ritual as hygiene, a rare space where conversation flowed freely and laughter echoed without fear of eavesdroppers. In this steam-filled haven, courtiers might trade gossip, lovers might whisper, and weary travellers might simply sigh. Warmth didn't only cleanse the skin, it softened the boundaries between people. You sit now beside the edge of the largest pool, trailing your hand through the cooling water. Tiny ripples chase your reflection. The warmth still clings faintly to your skin, though you haven't bathed. You feel the air's softness, how it wraps around you like an embrace. The castle beyond these walls may be stone and frost, but here, for a little while, humanity wins. There's a certain poetry to this, the idea that in the heart of winter, people created islands of comfort, spaces where warmth could be borrowed from flame, water, and one another. Perhaps that's the secret of survival they knew better than we do. Warmth is not something you possess, It's something you make, moment by moment. You rise, feeling the steam brush against your face one last time before you step back into the corridor. The air outside feels sharper now, more real. But something inside you has shifted. You've seen that even in the bleakest age, people found ways to bring gentleness to the world, to boil water, to light candles, to turn necessity into ritual. And as the heavy door swings closed behind you, sealing in the last curl of warmth and scent, you think to yourself, maybe this was the castle's greatest defense of all, not its walls or its towers, but its ability to nurture life, even in the heart of the coldest winter. When you return to the main hall later that evening, the fire is already blazing high, filling the chamber with a low, golden haze. The scent of wood smoke clings to everything: your cloak, the benches, even the rushes scattered across the floor. You sit close to the hearth, grateful for the familiar crackle and the wave of heat against your legs. The flames twist and roar, consuming oak logs that were carefully seasoned all summer long. But even as you warm your hands, your eyes wander to the woven tapestries nearby, the thick drapes that hang from every wall, their faded threads hiding something deeper than decoration. Those hangings are more than art, they are armor. Made of wool, linen, or sometimes silk, they insulate the stone walls, holding in precious warmth. When the fire burns low, they trap the heat like quiet guardians, softening the hard echo of the chamber and swallowing the chill that seeps from the walls. You touch the fabric and feel its dense weave beneath your fingers, heavy and slightly rough. Its scent, faintly musky, carries the memory of sheep and lanolin. In medieval times, wool was the unsung hero of survival. It dressed bodies, lined walls, stuffed mattresses, and blanketed beds. Chroniclers often praised its faithful service, for wool didn't merely clothe people, it protected them. Unlike linen, which chilled when damp, wool absorbed moisture from the air and continued to insulate. It was a living fabric, breathing, adjusting, almost loyal. Records from English manors list entire rooms filled with spinning wheels and looms during winter. The rhythmic creak of the spindle, the soft whir of thread being twisted, these were the sounds of life continuing through the frost. The women who worked there wove not only cloth but safety. Each thread meant another barrier between the human body and the cold that prowled just outside the door. Curiously enough, some fabrics were deliberately left unwashed after spinning, preserving the natural oils in the wool. Lanolin, the waxy substance secreted by sheep, gave the material its distinctive water-repellent quality. Cloaks and hose made from this oily wool smelled faintly of earth and animal, but they shrugged off rain and snow like nothing else. Sailors and shepherds knew its value best, but even in castles, the same principle held. A bit of scent was a small price for staying warm. Textile historians point out that medieval households maintained entire inventories of cloth sorted by season: light linen for summer, heavy wool for winter. These stores were guarded as jealously as weapons. Fine Flemish wool was traded across Europe, prized by nobles for its softness. Yet even the rough, homespun kind was vital. Without it, every breath of winter would have been sharper, every step across the cold floors more brutal. You draw your cloak tighter and watch how the firelight flickers across the tapestries. Each one tells a story: hunts, saints, legendary beasts, but behind the artistry lies practical genius. They are fastened slightly away from the wall, leaving a thin air pocket that acts as insulation. In rooms where no fire burns, those woven walls can mean the difference between sleep and shivering. Some scholars remain divided about whether this technique was widely understood or simply stumbled upon through necessity. Was it science or instinct? It's difficult to say. But as you sit in the quiet warmth of this hall, it's easy to imagine someone, centuries ago, draping heavy cloths across bare stone and realizing the air felt just a little less cruel. A lesser-known detail from French court records mentions that tapestries were occasionally lined with fur in the coldest seasons, a luxurious double barrier that turned chambers into velvet caves. The weight of those hangings must have been immense, but so too was their comfort. You reach out again, tracing one corner where the pattern has faded to threads. The wool feels alive, still slightly springy despite its age. The dyes, once vivid, have mellowed to soft autumn tones, ochre, russet, deep blue. The warmth that radiates from them isn't heat exactly, but presence. These fabrics absorbed centuries of laughter, music, whispered secrets. They remember. In the corner of the hall, a weaver's loom sits idle now, its frame of oak gleaming faintly in the firelight. You imagine her, perhaps the lady of the household herself, working there by day, her fingers deft and sure, the shuttle sliding back and forth, each movement a meditation against the cold, every inch of cloth, a promise that winter would not win. The sound of the fire deepens as another log collapses into embers. You lean closer, feeling the dry warmth stroke your face. Around you, the room has transformed. What once felt cavernous now feels cocooned. The tapestry-covered walls no longer echo your breath. The air itself seems thicker, gentler. A curious superstition once surrounded wool. People believed that sheep's warmth lingered in the cloth long after shearing. To wear it was to carry a trace of the animal's life, its pulse, its endurance. That idea, half practical and half mystical, reveals something about how people understood warmth. It wasn't just physics, it was spirit. Even monks, sworn to poverty, wrapped themselves in coarse woolen habits that bristled against the skin. The discomfort was part of the devotion, but the fabric's strength was undeniable. It held up through labor, through prayer, through the endless damp of cloisters. You stand and brush your hands against your cloak again. The lanolin sheen glints faintly in the firelight, and for a brief moment, the scent of earth and wool feels grounding. Perhaps warmth was never only about temperature. Perhaps it was about connection between people, animals, and the materials that kept them alive. Every sheep in the hills, every spinner at her wheel, every loom creaking in some cold tower, they were all part of the same quiet conspiracy against the cold. As you turn toward the corridor once more, the tapestry shifts slightly in the draught, its fibers catching the light like threads of fire. You realize that even when the flames die and the hall grows dark, these woven walls will keep whispering warmth to whoever listens closely enough. You follow the flickering lamplight down a narrow passageway lined with carved stone. The air grows colder again, and the faint echo of footsteps follows you from behind, as though the castle itself is breathing softly. At the end of the corridor, a small archway opens into a space unlike the grand halls or smoky kitchens you've seen before. The smell of incense drifts faintly through the air, sweet and resinous, and candlelight trembles along the vaulted ceiling. You've stepped into the chapel. Here, the cold feels different, reverent, almost deliberate. The flagstones beneath your feet are chilled but smooth, worn by centuries of prayer. The air hums faintly with the echoes of chants long since vanished. The warmth of the fire is gone, but in its place, there is another kind of heat. Spiritual, steady, invisible. Religious life in a medieval castle was constant, even in the heart of winter. Chapels, though rarely large, stood at the center of noble households, and daily prayers were said regardless of the temperature. Some days, the breath of the congregation would hang in the air like mist. On others, frost crept along the pews before sunrise. Yet still, the candles were lit. Contemporary records from Westminster and Caernarfon describe winter services so cold that priests wrapped themselves in extra vestments, and altar boys took turns holding small braziers near their feet beneath their robes. One chronicler even remarked, perhaps with a touch of humor, that faith burns brighter than coal in January. Curiously enough, the wax itself offered warmth of a kind. Candles were not only symbols of divine light, but also small sources of real heat. In poorly insulated chapels, hundreds might be lit at once during feasts or vigils, their combined flames raising the temperature by a few degrees, just enough to thaw fingers and lift spirits. The smell of burning tallow and beeswax mingled with incense, creating a scent that was at once sacred and strangely domestic. You sit quietly on a wooden bench near the front, your hands folded in your lap. The candle nearest you gutters, its wax running in slow, pale rivers. The flame flickers, as if nodding with the rhythm of your breath. Around you the shadows shift and shimmer. The light makes the cold almost beautiful. In these sacred chambers, warmth was often symbolic rather than physical. The fire of faith replaced the hearth's glow. The prayers themselves were seen as a kind of heat for the soul. Monks and priests wrote about the warmth of devotion as something literal, felt in the chest during moments of pure prayer. Some even believed that fervent faith could guard against sickness the cold humours of the spirit as well as the body. Still, practicality found its way into devotion. Many chapels had small wall niches where charcoal braziers were kept burning during long services. These holy fires were tended carefully, their coals glowing beneath iron grates. You can imagine the quiet relief of those who stood near them, pretending to warm their hands under the guise of piety. A rather forgotten detail from the 13th century notes that wealthier lords often donated firewood to local churches in winter for the comfort of the holy and the poor. It wasn't mere charity, it was acknowledgement. The castle's own hearth shared its bounty with the chapel's flame. Heat was an offering, as vital as bread or prayer. Some historians debate whether the chill of these chapels was intentional, an architectural reminder of humility, or simply inevitable. After all, thick stone and high ceilings made warmth impossible to contain. But even in that austerity, there was meaning. The cold sharpened awareness. It reminded worshippers that comfort was temporary and the soul eternal. You glance toward the altar, where a single candle stands taller than the rest. Its flame sways, steady but restless. The gold leaf on the cross behind it glints faintly, its light soft and forgiving. The walls around you are painted with saints and angels, their colors faded but their faces serene. Perhaps they too felt the cold once, when the paint was still wet and the mason's breath froze midword. The floor beneath the altar is warm to the touch, a trick of the builders perhaps. In some castles, chapels were built above kitchens or storerooms, allowing heat to rise naturally through the stones. Others placed furnaces beneath crypts, ensuring that the house of God never grew entirely lifeless in winter. Ingenious or incidental, it hardly matters now. The effect remains: warmth in unexpected places. You close your eyes and listen. The soft pop of candle wicks, the faint rustle of fabric. Somewhere, far off, the bell tolls the hour. Time feels slower here, measured not by sunlight but by flame. And you think about the people who once gathered in this same cold chamber, soldiers praying before battle, widows whispering for mercy, children clutching their parents' hands as they watched the candles tremble. For them, this warmth, however faint, was proof of grace. You reach out and cup your hand near one of the small candles. The flame bends toward you, and for a fleeting instant, you feel its fragile heat. It's not enough to chase away the chill in your fingers, but it's something more powerful, an echo of countless others who sought comfort here, century after century. As you rise to leave, the sound of your boots on the stone floor feels impossibly loud in the hush. You turn once more toward the altar, the glow of the candles painting your shadow against the wall. In this sacred cold, you sense the same truth that the monks once wrote about. Warmth is never only in the fire. Sometimes it burns quietly within the heart. And as the heavy door swings open, letting in a gust of winter air, you carry that faint heat with you, fragile, flickering, but alive. You step back into the corridor, the air colder now after leaving the chapel's soft candlelight. The hush of reverence fades into the murmurs of everyday life, a clatter of buckets, a faint bark echoing from below. You follow the sound, descending a winding stair that smells faintly of hay and damp fur. The torchlight flickers against the rough stone, and a low warmth meets you halfway down. It's different from fire's heat, softer, earthier, alive. The stables and lower halls of the castle are where life breathes most vividly. Horses stamp their hooves, dogs doze near straw beds, and sometimes even hawks rest tethered in their mews, feathers ruffling in the drafts. The smell is potent, a mingling of animals, hay, smoke, and humanity, but after days in the upper towers, it feels like home. Here, warmth comes not from fire, but from bodies. Records from 13th century households often mention that in the bitterest months, people slept where the animals did. Servants, guards, even travellers found comfort beside the stable walls. The animals' heat, trapped by low ceilings and straw bedding, turned these spaces into natural furnaces. Horses alone can radiate enough warmth to raise the temperature of a stable by several degrees. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. You walk between the stalls, each one filled with the quiet rhythm of breathing. Steam rises from the backs of the animals in slow curls. Their eyes gleam in the torchlight, calm, steady, ancient. A dog stirs as you pass, tail thumping softly against the floor. Its body, curled tight, radiates warmth like a living ember. There's a peculiar comfort in this shared survival, this mingling of human and beast. Medieval life didn't separate species the way we do now. Cats slept near looms to keep mice at bay. Hounds sprawled across rush-covered floors, their heat welcome company. Even falcons perched near their masters' chairs, cloaked against the draughts. The castle, for all its grandeur, was never silent. It breathed and rustled with living warmth. A chronicler from Normandy once wrote that a knight's best winter companion was not his sword, but his dog. You can see why. A loyal hound could warm both heart and hands, its body pressed close during sleepless nights. In paintings of the era, small lapdogs often appear curled at the feet of noblewomen more than mere pets. They were living heaters with names, ribbons, and beds of their own. Curiously, some castles even kept livestock indoors during sieges or extreme winters. Sheep, goats, and chickens would be herded into lower chambers to prevent them from freezing. Their presence filled the air with noise and odour, but also with heat. One 14th century steward's record describes a night so cold that the sheep were brought within, and warmth was found for all. That sentence, simple, practical, captures something deeply human, the refusal to let the world freeze them apart. You stop beside a mare, her breath clouding the air like fog. She leans her head toward you, nostrils flaring softly. You lay a hand against her neck, and the warmth there is startling dense, immediate, almost sacred. She smells of hay and earth, of life that has never left the soil. You stand there for a while, feeling her heartbeat through your palm, and for the first time in hours your fingers no longer ache. Some historians wonder if medieval builders understood the heating power of animals when designing castles. The proximity of kitchens, storerooms, and stables below living quarters may not have been accidental. Warm air, rising naturally, would seep through the floors above, creating subtle pockets of heat. Others argue it was simply convenience. Food and horses needed to be nearby. But the result was the same. The castle's warmth came from the creatures that sustained it. You turn toward a side door that opens into a small chamber, one of the groom's quarters. It's a simple room, a straw mattress on the floor, a cloak hung on a peg, a small brazier smouldering in the corner. The air is thick and smoky, but far from cold. A boy sleeps there, curled beside a hound whose tail flicks lazily in its dreams. The two of them breathe in rhythm, their shared warmth spreading like a quiet miracle through the tiny room. You crouch beside the brazier, watching the coals glow faintly red. It's strange, isn't it? The higher you go in the castle, the colder the air grows. The lower you descend, the more life you find. It's as if heat itself prefers humility. There's an old saying from the medieval North, where beasts breathe, frost flees. It isn't poetry, it's instruction. Farmers and guards knew that survival depended on proximity, on the unspoken alliance between humans and the creatures they tended. Warmth was not solitary. It was communal, shared through fur, straw, and trust. The torch crackles above you, and the mare shifts in her stall, hooves scraping softly. Somewhere, A rooster stirs prematurely, fooled by the firelight into thinking dawn has come. You smile at the sound, the sheer ordinariness of it. The castle's grandeur may fade, its walls may crumble, but this warmth born from breath and heartbeat endures. When you stand again, you brush bits of straw from your cloak and look toward the narrow slit of a window. Outside, the snow falls silently, thick and unhurried. Inside, the air vibrates with quiet life. You think of how these animals, these living furnaces, were not merely companions but part of the architecture of survival. The castle wasn't just stone and wood, it was a living ecosystem, every creature contributing its share of warmth. You stroke the mare's muzzle once more before turning toward the stairs. Her skin shivers faintly beneath your fingers, a ripple of muscle and breath. You whisper a wordless goodbye and begin the climb back to the upper floors. The air cools again as you ascend, but something inside you stays warm. You carry with you the memory of that living heat, the reminder that in the heart of the coldest season, it wasn't always the fires or fabrics that saved people. Sometimes, it was simply the closeness of another breathing soul. The warmth of the stables lingers faintly in your clothes as you climb back toward the upper chambers, each step echoing in the stairwell's hollow throat. The air grows thinner, cooler, drier. It carries a hint of old smoke, and somewhere, a draught sighs through a crack in the stone. You reach a landing and pause, pressing your palm against the wall. It feels solid, eternal, and yet it breathes, pulling heat from your skin. You find yourself wondering how the builders lived with what they made. These walls were monuments to strength, but they were also conductors of cold. And yet, within this design of fortitude, there was hidden cleverness, subtle choices that softened the edge of winter's cruelty. Castle architecture evolved slowly, each stone laid with lessons from frostbitten fingers. In early keeps, fire was the only answer to the cold. By the 13th century, design itself began to help. Builders began to understand that warmth could be shaped, contained, guided, encouraged to linger like a guest rather than flee like a fugitive. Look around and you'll see it. Fireplaces built deep into walls, angled so the heat would radiate more evenly. Chimneys positioned along inner walls rather than outer ones, so they shared warmth between rooms. Staircases wound tightly to trap rising air, while thick wooden doors sealed off corridors like giant thermal plugs. The castle, for all its age and grandeur, was quietly learning to breathe with intention. Excavations at Dover and Bodiam show that even the placement of rooms followed a logic of warmth. Kitchens sat beneath great halls, laundry rooms near bakehouses, and bedchambers above both. The heat from daily labor cooking, baking, brewing rose through the stone, seeping upward to where it was most needed. Whether by accident or design, architecture became its own heating system. Some modern experts believe this was no coincidence. They point out the narrow passages and hidden flues carved within certain walls' channels meant to funnel heat from one fireplace to another. Others argue it was practical improvisation, solutions found in the daily grind of winter. But the result feels almost modern, a primitive, beautiful logic of warmth. You walk down a smaller corridor now, its ceiling low and arching. The torchlight trembles along the plaster, revealing faint traces of color, old paint, red and ochre. The walls here are lined with wood panels, polished smooth. They creak softly under your fingertips, warmer than the stone beyond. This too was deliberate. Timber, even a thin layer, softened the touch of winter. It's easy to picture the carpenters at work chiseling, sanding, fitting planks to curve with the walls. The scent of fresh-cut wood mingling with smoke, the rhythm of mallets echoing through unfinished halls. They weren't just decorating, they were insulating. The castle, beneath its armor of stone, wore a second skin of oak and ash. A curious relic found in a Scottish stronghold suggests that some builders even experimented with double floors, wooden platforms raised slightly above the stone to trap air beneath. The result was subtle but noticeable, a cushion of still air that prevented the chill from climbing through one's boots. It may not have been luxury, but it was ingenuity born of need. You step into a narrow chamber tucked behind the main hall, a place once reserved for guards or servants. The air is warmer here, surprisingly so. The reason is simple. It sits directly behind the great hearth, sharing its back wall. The heat seeps through the stone, radiating into this quiet space. You rest your hand on the wall and feel its soft warmth, steady as a heartbeat. There's something deeply human about this adaptation. To carve out warmth where none was meant to exist, to turn the leftovers of comfort into new sanctuaries. Perhaps this small chamber was where a steward dozed, or a page polished armor while thawing his hands. The glow of warmth from the hearth beyond would have been faint, but precious. Not everyone agrees on how intentional this reuse of heat was. Some archaeologists call it accidental efficiency, while others see it as the earliest form of central heating in northern Europe. Regardless, the effect remains. These walls were not as indifferent as they seemed. Within their silence was design and architecture of empathy, however crude. The spiral stairways too carried warmth in curious ways. Because they twisted tightly around the inner core of the castle, they trapped air, forcing heat to rise slowly rather than vanish through open halls. In some keeps, the steps themselves were wooden rather than stone, a small mercy for bare or thinly shod feet. The smell of resin and oak would linger long after the fires below had died. You can almost imagine the castle's designer standing here centuries ago, hand on the same wall, squinting into the dark, thinking not just of defense but of comfort. Perhaps he was a man who'd known too many winters. Perhaps he'd lost friends to frost and hunger, and his stones were his answer, a fortress not only against war but against cold. As you move deeper into the chamber, the faint sound of wind beyond the walls fades. The warmth here is quiet, not the roaring heat of the kitchens or hearths, but the kind that seeps into bones unnoticed. You close your eyes and let it wash over you, a rare stillness, born not of flame but of structure. There's an unspoken truth in this castle's design. Warmth doesn't always need fire. Sometimes it's born of patience, of learning how air moves, how stone holds memory, how a small change in design can soften a harsh world. A manuscript from the late 14th century mentions a mason who claimed his walls could breathe warmth like lungs. Scholars debate whether this was poetry or pride, but standing here, you almost believe him. The air feels alive, pulsing gently, proof that even the coldest fortress could be coaxed into kindness. When you finally step back into the corridor, the temperature drops sharply again. The contrast is immediate, but it leaves you smiling. The castle may be a maze of frost and flame, but it remembers warmth in its bones, and now, so do you. You turn toward the stairwell, the torch sputtering in your hand, and realize how remarkable it is that people, without machines or science as we know it, taught stone to hold heat and air to linger. In a world ruled by winter, architecture itself became an act of compassion. Morning again. Pale light creeps across the courtyard, turning the snow to silver and the castle to bone. You rise slowly, wrapping your cloak close, the chill pressing against you like a weight. Even after all this time inside these walls, the cold never truly leaves, it only waits. Still, people here know how to meet it, to shape their days around its moods. The rhythm of winter life in a medieval castle was unlike any other season. Everything slowed, thickened, grew deliberate. You move through the hall now and sense it in every sound: the muffled scrape of a broom on rushes, the soft clatter of wooden cups, the sigh of wind sneaking beneath the doors. Outside, the world sleeps. Inside, people work carefully, conserving both energy and warmth. Winter routine began before dawn. Servants rose early to rekindle the hearth, sometimes hacking at frozen logs to coax flame from reluctant wood. The first smoke of the day carried through the corridors like a prayer. In the kitchens, bread baked while frost still clung to the window panes. Guards stamped their feet at the gatehouse, blowing on their hands, muttering oaths that melted like steam. Written accounts from noble households describe the day's structure as a balance of necessity and survival. Chores were arranged according to warmth: baking, brewing, mending, and weaving all close to the fire. Stonework and carpentry paused until spring. Letters were written only in the warmest part of the day, when ink would flow freely again. Even study and reading were rationed by temperature. Cold, stiffened fingers dulled the mind and froze imagination mid-thought. Curiously, some castles adjusted their entire schedule around the fire. The great hall would be heated for communal tasks in the morning, left to smoulder while the household rested after the noon meal, and reignited at dusk for the evening gathering. It wasn't laziness, it was strategy. Firewood was precious, and every flame had to be justified. You walk toward the hearth now, where a few servants are spreading fresh rushes over the floor. The sound is dry and soothing, the whisper of straw against stone. The rushes, once green and fragrant, serve both comfort and cleanliness. They insulate the floor, absorb moisture, and soften footsteps. Over them, herbs like lavender, thyme, and meadowsweet are sprinkled, filling the air with faint sweetness. Even amid the smoke and draught, the hall smells almost alive. A lesser-known record from a Yorkshire estate mentions that rushes were changed weekly in winter, but only monthly in summer. The reasoning was simple. In winter, wet boots, spilled ale, and the drip of melting snow turned the floors into swamps. Fresh rushes weren't luxury, they were hygiene, and every change brought a brief burst of warmth, the scent of dried grass mingling with fire and wool. Life in these months revolved around firelight and candlelight. When dusk fell early and dawn came late, darkness ruled most of the day. You can almost hear the scraping of flint as torches are lit, the first hiss of tallow catching flame. Candles, expensive and laborious to make, were rationed. Families gathered near the hearth to share both light and body heat. The glow bound them together in a way sunlight never could. Some scholars suggest that this intimacy, the closeness of people huddled around one flame-shaped medieval social bonds. It was in winter that stories were told, music played, and oaths whispered. The hall's warmth became both physical and emotional. To be invited to sit by the fire was a sign of belonging. To be kept in the cold was punishment. You glance toward a group of workers near the wall, their breath misting as they polish armor and tools. Even in the biting chill, the rhythm of labor continues. Metal gleams faintly in the half-light, throwing off reflections that look almost like fire themselves. The clang of steel against whetstone echoes softly through the air, a reminder that even when war sleeps, preparation doesn't. There's an account from a Flemish traveller who visited a northern keep in midwinter. He wrote, "The day is divided not by bells, but by the warmth of rooms." He described how he moved from chamber to chamber, chasing heat like sunlight. Chapel in the morning, hall by noon, kitchen by evening. It paints a vivid picture of survival, as choreography each step timed to the shifting rhythm of warmth. Curiously enough, not all warmth was welcome. The smoke from fires often clung low in the halls, turning ceilings black and leaving throats raw. Some households believed that a smoky hall meant bad luck, the spirits of the fire displeased. Others took it as a good omen, proof that the hearth's heart still beat. Either way, the day began and ended in its presence. As afternoon wanes, you wander through the castle again. The corridors are quieter now. Children nap near the hearth's edge. Dogs dream, paws twitching. The echo of distant voices drifts up from the kitchens below, a gentle hum beneath the stone. You pass a window slit where the light has already begun to fade. The snow outside glows faintly blue, the color of silence. Evenings brought their own rhythm. The household gathered in the great hall, drawn by necessity and habit. A single fire served them all, lords, servants, travellers alike. Someone would read aloud or play music. Others mended clothes or sharpened blades. Meals were hearty but simple. Bread, broth, maybe roasted roots. The flickering firelight turned faces to bronze. and laughter replaced the day's chill. Some experts argue that this winter closeness, the enforced gathering by firelight, fostered a stronger sense of community than summer's freedoms ever could. The castle became not just a fortress, but a living organism, every person a vital spark keeping the whole from freezing. As night descends once more, you sit quietly near the hearth. The flames have mellowed to embers, glowing deep red like the heart of the world. The rushes crackle softly beneath your boots. Outside, snow falls again, erasing footprints and sound alike. Inside, warmth gathers in pools of light, and you can almost feel the day folding itself shut. It strikes you that life here was a constant negotiation with the cold, never victory, only endurance. Each task, each breath, each flicker of fire was an act of balance. The people who lived within these walls didn't defeat winter. They learned its rhythm, lived inside its heartbeat, and called it home. Night settles deep over the castle, pressing close to the walls like a second skin. Outside, snow drifts softly against the gatehouse. Inside, the last of the day's warmth flickers in the hearth. You draw closer to the fire, and with you come others, guards finishing their watch, servants finished with their chores, a kitchen maid still dusted with flour. The hall fills slowly with quiet laughter, the scent of wood smoke, and the comforting murmur of conversation. It's in these hours, when the frost thickens and the world goes still, that people remember how to be human. The games begin. Leisure in a medieval castle wasn't grand or loud. It was small, bright, and alive, a spark of joy in the long dark months. Around the fire, people played dice or knucklebones, their laughter rising with each roll. The carved cubes click against the table like little bursts of luck. Someone teases another for cheating. Another swears by St. George that fortune hates him. The sound is warm enough to make even the coldest room feel almost kind. Cards, as you know them, came later, but board games were already beloved. Backgammon, chess, and the game of tables filled countless winter nights. In one corner of the hall, two men hunch over a wooden board carved with tiny squares. A candle between them drips wax onto the surface, its flame trembling each time one exhales. A move, a counter, a pause. The fire crackles. The game continues. Some scholars trace these games to the East, carried by traders and soldiers. Others argue they grew naturally from the human need to make order out of uncertainty, to give the cold nights rules and outcomes, a kind of structure against chaos. Whatever their origin, they became the rhythm of winter evenings, strategy, laughter, rivalry, and the comfort of shared time. Near the fire, a group of women sew by lamplight, their needles glinting like frost. They talk quietly, their voices weaving together with the music of the hall. From somewhere deeper in the room comes a soft melody, a lute perhaps, or a flute carved from yew. The notes drift upward, tender and shy at first, then fuller as confidence grows. Music, too, was warmth. There's a rather charming account from the 14th century describing how a castle household entertained itself on winter nights. The ladies and the knights took turns in telling merry tales, and laughter rolled like thunder in the beams above. You can almost hear it, the sound of stories, half true, half dreamed, filling the space where cold once ruled. Curiously enough, one common form of amusement was the riddle. People loved to challenge one another's wit, to spark thought and laughter in equal measure. What runs but never tires? What burns but gives no light? The answers water and the heart remind you that humour and reflection often shared the same fire. Not everyone joined in. Near the back, a soldier mends his gear by the dim light of a candle, the sound of thread pulling through leather steady as breath. A cook naps on a bench, apron still tied, her head tilted toward the warmth. Even silence here feels companionable. The fire's glow knits everyone together, strangers and family alike, under the same orange halo. Some historians believe that the nightly gathering by the hearth was the origin of countless folk tales, the ones that would later travel far beyond castle walls. When you listen closely to the hum of voices, you can almost hear the seeds of those old legends: dragons sleeping beneath mountains, spirits wandering the snow, lovers separated by storms. Stories grew out of necessity, not imagination alone. They were fuel, keeping minds warm when bodies trembled. One writer from the early Renaissance called storytelling the fire that needs no wood. It's a perfect image, warmth born not from flame but from words, carried from mouth to mouth, century to century. You lean back now, feeling the rough wood of the bench beneath your shoulders. The hall smells of smoke, wool, and roasted grain. A jug of ale passes from hand to hand, each sip a small rebellion against the cold. Someone begins to sing a low, lilting tune about summer fields and swallows returning. The melody is simple, but it stirs something deep inside you. As the firelight sways, shadows dance across the walls. The loom, the dogs, the faces half lit and half hidden. You realize that in these hours, the castle transforms. The hard lines of stone soften. Laughter fills spaces once ruled by silence. Winter doesn't vanish, but it forgets its cruelty for a little while. Oddly, the games and songs weren't just entertainment, they served purpose. Monks and chroniclers alike wrote that mirth lightened the humours and warmed the blood. Medieval medicine linked joy with heat, melancholy with cold. To laugh then was not sin, it was survival. Even the church in its sternest days made peace with that truth. Outside, the wind howls faintly through the arrow slits. The storm presses close, but the fire roars louder. Dice tumble again. Someone claps in triumph. A hound sighs and shifts closer to the flames, paws twitching in its dream. The night stretches long, but it doesn't feel empty. You sit among them, these ghosts of laughter and game and song, and you feel the same pulse they did, the defiant warmth that rises not just from fire, but from people gathered near it. And as you close your eyes, letting the music and murmurs blend into one soft rhythm, you realize something simple and timeless. Warmth isn't only what shields you from the cold. Sometimes, it's what you create in spite of it. The fire in the great hall has burned low by the time you step outside. The heavy door groans behind you, and for a moment, the sound of warmth, the laughter, the crackle, the hum of voices fades into silence. What greets you now is the pure, crystalline stillness of a castle wrapped in snow. The courtyard lies under a smooth white blanket, unbroken but for a few scattered prints. Fox, raven, man. The air bites with such sharpness that it almost hums. You draw your cloak tight, but still the cold finds its way beneath, threading through fabric and skin like a slow whisper. Every sound here is exaggerated by the frost. A drop of water falling from an icicle lands with a note so crisp it could be music. Snow softens everything. Even the roughest stones of the battlements seem gentler, smoothed by the frozen hush. You walk slowly, the world reduced to shades of blue and silver. The torches lining the walls flicker, their flames small and uncertain in the open air. Castles in winter were creatures of two worlds inside. The flicker of humanity. Outside, a vast, indifferent beauty. You can see why chroniclers often described them as sleeping beasts. The towers rise above you like dark ribs, the battlements glistening with frost. Breath billows from your mouth, a phantom twin that follows you with every step. Contemporary letters from soldiers and stewards alike tell of such mornings, the silence after snowfall, the way the very air seemed to hold its breath. One wrote, "The snow makes no sound, yet it speaks of the world's stillness." You understand what he meant. Even now it feels as though time itself has stopped to listen. And yet, this silence is deceptive. Beneath it lies work, duty, endurance. A stable hand leads a horse carefully across the icy stones, the animal's breath steaming like a forge. A guard stamps his feet near the gatehouse fire, blowing into his gloves. A kitchen boy hurries past with a basket of wood, his cheeks red, his nose running. The cold unites them all in quiet choreography. Curiously, There's evidence that some castles planned their defenses around the acoustics of snow. A blanket of frost could muffle footsteps but also dull sound from approaching enemies. Guards learned to listen differently to the crunch of snow underfoot, to the shift of wind that carried voices further in cold air. Winter changed everything, even warfare. You look up. The sky is heavy and low, the color of pewter. Snowflakes begin to fall again, slow, deliberate, one by one, as if the world has decided it isn't quite done burying itself. They land on your hood, melting instantly into tiny spots of dampness. The smell of iron fills the air, the scent of cold itself, clean and old. There's a beauty here that feels almost sacred. The courtyard, the frozen moat, the towers rimed with ice, they seem eternal, as though the castle was built not by men but by winter itself. You can almost hear it breathe, the creak of wood, the soft drip of melting frost, the whisper of wind through the arrow slits. A lesser-known account from a northern abbey describes monks walking through snow-covered cloisters at dawn, each footstep producing a sound like paper folding. They wrote that the silence of snow was a prayer too large for words. You think of that now as you stand still, watching your breath drift upward and vanish. Not everyone found this beauty comforting. To some, the endless white was a reminder of isolation. Entire castles could be snowed in for weeks, their gates impassable. Letters went undelivered, travelers stranded, markets silenced. A sense of stillness turned to suffocation. There are journals filled with laments about the imprisonment of frost. But for others, winter's silence offered reflection. Lords took counsel in their chambers, poets wrote by firelight, artisans mended tools, soldiers repaired armor. Life slowed, yes, but it didn't stop. The snow became both blanket and boundary, a time to look inward. You pause near the well in the courtyard. Its rim is slick with ice, its rope stiff as iron. Beneath the surface, the water lies dark and still, like a mirror waiting for spring. Your reflection shivers there, a blur of breath and motion. The silence presses in, intimate and vast all at once. Some experts suggest that the human relationship to snow in medieval times was profoundly spiritual. It was purity and punishment, death and renewal. It reminded people that they were small, temporary, fleeting against a world that would always outlast them. Yet it also whispered of endurance because snow, for all its quiet cruelty, always melts. You walk toward the outer wall, your boots sinking into the soft powder. The sky brightens briefly as the clouds shift, revealing a pale sun, more suggestion than light. The flakes shimmer as they fall, catching that frail glow. You reach the parapet and rest your hands on the cold stone, looking out across the white horizon. The world feels endless. Down below, the frozen moat glints like glass. Somewhere far off, you can hear the faintest sound, a single crow calling, its voice cracking through the air like a memory. Otherwise, nothing moves. The stillness is complete. And then, in that silence, you hear something softer still. The faint thrum of life within the castle walls, the fires burning, the horses breathing, the whisper of someone stoking coals in the kitchen. Warmth, hidden but present, beating beneath the snow's perfect calm. You realize that this too is part of the story of warmth, not just flame and fur and stone, but the understanding that life continues quietly beneath the cold, patient as roots beneath frost. The people of these castles knew it well. They didn't fight the silence, they learned to live within it. You close your eyes and listen again, letting the cold rest against your face. The snow falls thicker now, muffling even your heartbeat. The world holds its breath once more, and you stand in the middle of it between heat and ice, between stillness and endurance, just another traveler learning how the past survived the winter. By the time the sun dips behind the horizon again, the air has turned sharper still, so cold that sound seems to crack in half when it travels. You find yourself standing near the outer curtain wall, where a group of guards huddle beside a brazier. The flames flicker wildly in the wind, throwing brief splashes of light across the armor that gleams like frostbitten silver. You pull your cloak tighter and feel how the air bites at the edges of your breath. This is the cold they feared most, the kind that came during siege or war. When winter and warfare met, survival became art and desperation in equal measure. A castle under siege in January was a cruel paradox. Fortified, yet trapped, full of stores, yet starving. The same walls that kept enemies out also sealed the cold in. Firewood dwindled, rations froze, and morale became as fragile as ice. Chroniclers describe such winters not in days, but in degrees of endurance. You can almost imagine it now. The fires burning day and night, smoke curling like dark ribbons above the battlements. Men wrapped in layers of wool and leather, their faces blackened with soot. The clang of iron against iron muted by snow. The air filled with the mingled smells of tallow, smoke, and fear. One letter from a garrison commander in northern France speaks of the siege that froze both friend and foe. He wrote of soldiers on both sides lighting fires within sight of one another, their plumes of smoke mingling in the wind, two camps, two flames, the same battle against the same enemy, the cold itself. Curiously enough, during long sieges, it was common for besiegers to suffer as much as those within. Winter leveled all ranks and walls. Frost didn't discriminate. Soldiers' tents collapsed beneath snow, and their armor froze against their skin. One account from 1315 tells of men thawing their mail shirts by the fire each morning before putting them on, only to have the metal burn their fingers. Inside the walls, the castle turned inward. Fires burned smaller, hoarded like treasure. Wood was rationed by the hour, straw stuffed into windows, and every animal became a source of heat, alive or not. Kitchen records from the time mention bones boiled 3 times for broth, then burned for fuel. Nothing was wasted. Everything fed the flames or the living. Historians still disagree on which danger was greater, starvation or frost. In truth, they were the same battle. Cold dulled hunger but also slowed the blood. It made hands tremble and minds wander. It crept into the marrow until even courage froze. You follow the guards' movements, their faces faintly red from the brazier's glow. They speak little. Words freeze too quickly out here. One of them feeds a branch into the coals, and sparks leap upward, bright against the dark sky. It's a small, defiant gesture, but one that carries centuries of meaning. A flame kept alive, no matter the odds. A rare surviving poem from a soldier during a northern siege captures this beautifully. No horn was sounded. The snow made all still. The fire our trumpet. The smoke our banner. We fought not for land, but for the warmth to wake again. No one knows who wrote it, but the sentiment feels eternal. The castle's defenders found ingenious ways to endure. They dug hidden flues to draw warm air from the kitchens toward the towers. They used animal hides as makeshift insulation, hanging them behind doors. Guards rotated shifts rapidly, never staying in the wind longer than necessary. Even the drawbridge chains were greased with fat to keep them from freezing solid. You step closer to the brazier, feeling the faint sting of heat against your cheeks. The guards glance at you briefly, then return to their watch. One rubs his hands together, the leather of his gloves creaking softly. The fire hisses as snowflakes fall into it, vanishing instantly. It's hard to picture war amid such beauty, the sky overhead scattered with stars, the snow glittering like powdered glass. And yet, history insists that battles were fought in this silence, that arrows once hissed through this same frozen air. There's a strange calm in that thought, how life and death, fire and ice, coexisted without contradiction. Some experts suggest that winter warfare shaped the very design of castles, their thicker walls, deeper wells, and vast storage rooms born of lessons learned in frost and famine. Others think it was mere coincidence, the outcome of practicality rather than trauma. But walking these walls now, you sense that every stone remembers. Every frost-bitten battlement carries the echo of a night when someone refused to let the fire die. The brazier flares suddenly as another log catches. The light spills across the snow, painting the men's faces in gold and shadow. You can see their breath in the air, mingling like smoke. One hums softly, some forgotten tune from home, carried here through miles of cold. The melody barely rises above the wind, yet it fills the space more completely than sound should. You realize, standing among them, that this moment, quiet, weary, stubborn, is the heart of every castle winter. Not the feasts or the tapestries, not even the hearths in the great halls, but this: men keeping vigil beside a dying fire, waiting for dawn that will come late and pale, and still believing that light is worth the wait. You lift your gaze to the horizon. The stars shimmer faintly through the icy haze, distant but unblinking. Somewhere far off, the faint howl of a wolf threads through the stillness. The guards don't react, they've heard it before. They simply feed the fire again. And as you watch them, you feel a quiet truth settle in your chest. Warmth, in the harshest winters, was never just about heat. It was about endurance. The willingness to stand guard through the longest night, to share the last ember, to believe that the world, despite its cruelty, could still be kind come morning. When dawn returns, it is a pale, reluctant thing, less a sunrise than a slow silvering of the sky. The cold has deepened overnight, hardening the ground until it gleams like polished glass. You wake to the faint clang of a bell and the hollow scrape of footsteps in the corridor. The castle stirs once more, as it always does, each morning a quiet victory. You step into the hall and find the fire reduced to embers. A servant crouches before it, blowing gently through a bronze pipe to coax it back to life. Thin curls of smoke twist upward, and soon a spark catches a fragile miracle that grows into warmth. Watching her work, you realize that tending the fire wasn't just a chore, it was a calling. In medieval households, the role of the firekeeper, often a woman, was sacred. From dawn until nightfall she maintained the hearth, fed the flames, cleared the ash, and watched over the coals like a mother over her child. The health of the fire was the health of the home. If it went out, disaster followed. Relighting it wasn't simple. Fire had to be borrowed from another hearth, carried carefully through wind and snow in a clay pot or an iron pan. Some historians believe this ritual of borrowing fire had spiritual weight. The act symbolized kinship, one household sharing its life, force with another. Even in times of rivalry, neighbors lent fire to one another. The flame, after all, belonged to no one. It was everyone's fragile guardian. A record from a Yorkshire manor describes an entire ceremony surrounding this practice. Each year, the household extinguished all flames on the night before Candlemas. At dawn, a single spark was drawn anew from the church's holy fire and carried through the castle, reigniting every hearth. The belief was simple yet profound. Warmth began again, pure and blessed. You kneel beside the servant now, watching her scrape the ash with steady patience. Her hands are red and cracked from work, but her movements are sure. She adds a handful of kindling, then another, until the coals breathe back to life. The warmth blooms slowly, brushing your face with soft relief. Firekeeping was an art. Too much wood wasted fuel, too little smothered flame. The ash had to be raked just so, to cradle the embers through the night. Many castle inventories list tools for this purpose: tongs, bellows, shovels, and iron pokers with handles shaped like leaves or beasts. These weren't luxuries, they were instruments of survival. Curiously, archaeological digs at several castles reveal ash pits dug directly beneath hearths, connected to small vents that carried air upward. This clever design allowed fires to breathe and burn cleaner. Some scholars argue it shows a surprising understanding of combustion. Others think it was merely the product of centuries of trial and error. Either way, the effect was the same: steadier heat, less smoke, and longer life for the fire. There's a quiet dignity in this ritual. The firekeeper doesn't speak as she works. You can hear only the soft clink of metal, and the faint hiss of new wood catching flame. The smell of smoke mingles with wool, bread, and morning air. The first real warmth of the day spreads across the stones, gentle but certain. In some regions, the hearth was considered the heart of the household spirit itself. Folk believed a small deity or ancestral guardian lived in the fire, watching over those who fed it. To spill water into it, or to let it die unattended, was bad luck and insult to the unseen guest. Every spark had a soul, every ember a memory. You can imagine how such beliefs came to be. In a world where warmth meant life, the flame's survival was a measure of devotion. A glowing hearth promised more than heat, it promised tomorrow. The servant stands and dusts her apron. Her breath steams faintly as she moves toward another fireplace down the corridor, carrying a small ember in a clay pan. You follow her, watching how carefully she walks, shielding it with her hands. The coal glows faintly in the dim light, a single heartbeat of color in the grey morning. There's something almost holy about it. One spark, carefully tended, lighting another fire, and another, until the whole castle hums again with life. The warmth isn't sudden, it spreads like music, room by room, note by note. In the kitchens, the new day's fires are already taking shape. Pots hang from iron hooks, the smell of broth rising. In the great hall, servants feed the hearth with oak, stacking it with practiced rhythm. In the chapel, candles are relit, their flames swaying gently as if in greeting. Everywhere, the same quiet act repeats, warmth reborn. Not everyone agrees on how much symbolism medieval people attach to these rituals. Some claim it was superstition, others see it as poetry woven into daily labor. But standing here, surrounded by the faint crackle of kindling and the whisper of rising heat, it's hard not to feel that something larger is at work. You touch the edge of the hearthstone, still warm from the servant's care. It feels smooth and familiar, worn by centuries of hands doing exactly this. You imagine the generations that came before each dawn the same, kneeling, breathing life into embers, whispering perhaps a small prayer under their breath. Outside, the wind moans faintly against the shutters, but inside, the flame steadies, the hall brightens, a kettle hums softly. And just like that, the day begins again. In this rhythm of tending and rekindling lies the true secret of survival. Not grand gestures or roaring fires, but the small, persistent act of keeping heat alive. The medieval people knew it instinctively. That endurance isn't about conquering the cold, but about refusing to let the light go out. You sit for a moment longer, watching the fire's heart turn from orange to gold. Then you rise, the warmth following you as you step into the next corridor, carrying with you the simple, timeless truth that has burned in every home since the first, that a single spark, if guarded well, is enough to see you through the longest winter. By midday, the castle hums with quiet motion. The sun outside is weak, the color of tarnished silver, but within these walls, life persists through routine and rhythm. The fires have found their stride. The air smells of wood smoke and roasted grain. You follow the faint heat up another narrow stairway, one that spirals so tightly you brush the walls with each turn. It leads not to grandeur, but to the people who keep the warmth alive, the servants' quarters. These rooms, tucked beneath the rafters and deep along the inner walls, are the hidden pulse of the castle. Their ceilings are low, their windows small, and yet they carry a kind of intimacy that the great halls never know. Here, warmth doesn't come from luxury, it comes from proximity. You duck beneath a low archway and step into one of the sleeping chambers. The air is warmer than you expect. 7 or 8 straw mattresses line the floor, arranged so close they nearly touch. The faint scent of hay, sweat and wool fills the air, mingling with the smoke that seeps in from the hearth below. You run your hand across a coarse blanket, rough but heavy, woven from unwashed wool that still smells faintly of the sheep it came from. It's not comfort as you know it, but it is something better: shared heat. Medieval servants understood a truth modern minds often forget, that bodies generate warmth best together. Sleeping close, shoulder to shoulder, wasn't only camaraderie, it was survival. A servant's quarter was less a bedroom than a hibernation chamber. In deep winter, even the most modest castle would host a chorus of snores beneath low ceilings, each breath another stitch in the quilt of collective endurance. A fragment of a 14th century letter survives from a steward in Normandy. The boys sleep so tight upon one another that no frost can find them. You smile at the image. There is tenderness in it, a reminder that warmth, in the end, was never solitary. Curiously enough, the walls of these rooms were often plastered or even whitewashed, not just for cleanliness but to trap heat. A smooth surface reflected firelight better, turning even a single candle into a source of brightness. Some quarters were built along the castle's inner ring, where kitchens and bakehouses below sent warmth upward through the stone. The servants, practical and ingenious, found their own ways to fight the cold. They lined cracks in the walls with cloth, hung spare cloaks over doorways, and used bundles of hay as insulation. In some households, people slept under a shared rug rather than separate blankets, a communal weight of woven warmth. It wasn't elegance, but it worked. There's a story recorded by a visiting monk who spent a night among castle servants during a harsh northern winter. He wrote with equal parts surprise and admiration that their laughter was hotter than the hearth. He described them joking, singing, and telling stories deep into the night, the air thick with smoke and mirth. He concluded that joy itself was their fire. You crouch near one of the narrow windows now. Frost traces delicate fern-like patterns along the horn covering. Through it, you see only grey sky and drifting snow, but inside, the space feels cocooned. The faint creak of wood, the whisper of breath, the sound of someone turning in sleep, it all weaves together like music. Some historians argue that these communal quarters, crude though they were, provided a kind of comfort the nobility lacked. The lords and ladies slept alone in their cold, high chambers, surrounded by silk and silence, while those below shared warmth and company. Isolation, after all, is its own kind of chill. You touch the wall near the floor and feel faint heat bleeding upward, the kitchen fires working their invisible alchemy. It's not much, but enough to soften the edges of the cold. You imagine the people who lived here centuries ago, cooks with smoke-streaked faces, maids with flour, dusted hands, stable boys smelling faintly of hay. Their laughter, their quarrels, their snores all folded together in this warm little pocket of stone. A lesser-known custom, mentioned in an old household manual, describes servants heating bricks or stones near the fire before bedtime. They'd wrap them in rags and place them at their feet under the blankets. The warmth would last for hours, sometimes until morning. You can almost feel it now, the weight of the heated brick, the slow release of comfort against icy toes. One might call this poverty, but standing here, surrounded by the remnants of their small world, the worn blankets, the straw, the faint imprint of human life, you feel something else entirely. You feel resilience. These were people who didn't have enough, and yet always found enough. Even their laughter, muffled now by centuries, seems to linger. You can picture them in the flickering lamplight, whispering jokes between yawns, sharing bread, wrapping arms around shoulders as the wind howled outside. There's something deeply human about that picture, unpretentious, unrecorded, eternal. You sit down on the straw mattress, the texture rough but yielding. The air smells faintly of ash and wool, the twin scents of endurance. You breathe in, and for a moment, it feels as if you've joined them, as if the centuries between you and them have dissolved in the shared, universal act of seeking warmth. Perhaps this was the secret no chronicle ever captured, that while kings froze in towers of stone, warmth was not a privilege of rank but of closeness. A castle might divide its people by status, but the cold united them all. You lie back for a moment, staring up at the timbered ceiling, where shadows move like gentle waves. Somewhere below, a fire crackles. You feel its faint pulse through the floorboards, an echo of comfort travelling upward through stone and time. And as your eyes drift shut, You understand why they could sleep through the longest nights. It wasn't the thickness of the blankets or the strength of the fire. It was the nearness of others, the quiet rhythm of shared breath, the fragile but certain warmth that lives between bodies and trust. By evening, the snow has slowed to a soft dusting, and a thin veil of mist drapes the courtyard like lace. You climb again, this time toward the highest chambers, the ones belonging to the lord and lady of the castle. The steps grow narrower as you ascend, winding through stone that smells faintly of soot and age. When you reach the top, the air is still and cold, but cleaner somehow, touched by the scent of beeswax and faded lavender. You push open a wooden door and step inside. The Lord's solar, the private chamber reserved for warmth and privacy, unfolds before you like a secret. The light here is golden, soft, coming not from torches but from the glow of a carefully tended fire. Curtains drape thickly around the bed, and the walls are hidden beneath layers of tapestry gardens, saints, battles frozen in thread. This room, you realize, is warmth elevated to art. Every detail is designed to hold the fragile luxury of heat. The hearth is carved deep into the wall, its hood sweeping upward in graceful stone arcs to trap the rising smoke. The air feels gentler here, buffered by fabric and fur. It's not truly warm, not by your modern sense, but it's enough to make you exhale with relief. The solars were the beating hearts of noble comfort. Unlike the cavernous great halls below, they were small, enclosed, and deliberately layered to keep the cold out. The bed itself was the centerpiece of this private world, a monument to warmth and sleep. You approach it now, pulling back the edge of the canopy curtain. Inside, it's a world of its own. Layers of linen sheets, woolen blankets, and fur coverlets pile high upon a feather mattress. The scent of animal hide and herbs lingers faintly, sweet gale, lavender, maybe even rose petals. Beneath the bed frame, a low wooden chest sits open, filled with spare cloths and a curious metal pan with a long handle. That pan, still faintly darkened by soot, was a common companion on cold nights, a bed warmer. Servants would fill it with hot coals, close the lid, and slide it between the sheets to chase away the chill before their lord or lady retired. The crackle of the coals, the soft scent of singed linen, the promise of heat spreading through the bed, all of it a nightly ritual of care. A 15th century diary kept by a noblewoman mentions this routine in tender detail. Marjorie brings the brass pan, and the sheets smoke lightly. The scent comforts me. The bed is hot as a loaf from the oven. You smile at that, the poetry of survival disguised as routine. Curiously, some castles employed more elaborate devices, stone or ceramic foot warmers tucked under the covers, or even bottles filled with hot water, primitive, yet astonishingly familiar. Every object was designed for one simple miracle: the preservation of heat. You sit on the edge of the bed, and the wood creaks softly beneath you. The fur is heavy, dense, and when you run your fingers across it, you feel the ghosts of winters long past. The people who once slept here might have had power and privilege, but at night they shared the same vulnerability as everyone else, the long wait for morning's warmth. A lesser-known custom, particularly in northern Europe, was the night tent. Within the bed's canopy, additional curtains were drawn tight to create a cocoon of fabric. By morning, frost might have formed on the outer drapes, but inside, breath and body heat kept the small space tolerably warm. Some beds even had panels or boards that could be closed entirely, creating a chamber within a chamber, a wooden womb of warmth. You can imagine it now. The Lord slipping beneath the covers, the flicker of firelight glowing through the thin veil of fabric, the faint scent of wax and smoke mixing with the hush of winter beyond the walls. The world would shrink to that small, glowing space, the only place where warmth and stillness could truly belong to one person. Yet even here, the cold found its way in. The windows rattled, the walls sighed, and the air turned sharp before dawn. Servants would rise early to rekindle the fire, creeping silently through the room, so as not to wake their masters. It was said that a good servant could stir an entire hearth without making a sound. Scholars still discuss whether medieval nobles ever truly felt comfortable in these rooms. One school of thought insists they were as cold as tombs. Another argues that layers of fabric and fur created genuine comfort. The truth, as ever, lies somewhere between the kind of warmth that wasn't constant but earned, moment by moment. You walk toward the window. The shutter is half open, and a sliver of wind slides in, cold enough to sting your cheek. You close it carefully and fasten the iron latch. The world outside vanishes, replaced by the dim reflection of the fire behind you. The room glows again, caught between flame and shadow. It's easy to see why such chambers were cherished. Here, warmth became a symbol of intimacy, privilege, even love. The solar was where letters were written, secrets whispered, children born. It was a room for the living, not the ceremonial. There's a line in a medieval romance that describes the moment a knight returns from campaign. He came to her chamber, and she had drawn the curtains close against the cold. Within, the air was soft as breath. You think about that, the idea that warmth was not just temperature, but tenderness. You glance around once more. The tapestries shift faintly in a hidden draught, and the fire throws its light higher for a moment, painting the walls in copper. This room, you realize, is the culmination of every small battle fought elsewhere in the castle. Every ember tended, every window shuttered, every fur brushed and laid. You pull the bed curtains closed and stand still for a moment in the muffled dark. The sound of the fire becomes distant, soft. The air holds steady, warmer than before. You inhale deeply the scent of linen, fur, and faint smoke, and for a heartbeat, the centuries collapse. You could almost believe that the warmth around you has never truly gone out. When you wake the next morning, the first thing you notice is the silence, the kind of deep, crystalline hush that only comes after a long night of snow. You push aside the fur coverlet and step into a patch of light that leaks through the shutter cracks. Dust motes drift in it like tiny suns. The fire has died to embers, but the warmth lingers faintly in the stone, a kind of ghost heat that clings to the hearth. You pull your cloak tighter and move to rekindle the fire, just as those before you would have done countless times. A few sparks, a puff of ash, and soon the crackle returns, shy but steady. The flame's light dances over the chamber walls, over the tapestries, and over the collection of objects on the table, nearby tools of winter survival that tell stories of quiet invention. Castles were not simply cold monuments, they were workshops of adaptation. You pick up a clay lamp first, its spout still darkened from use. Small, simple, and easy to overlook, it was one of the earliest heaters. When filled with oil and left to burn through the night, it offered not only light, but a modest heat. Held close, it could warm hands or dry damp gloves. A row of them together could raise the temperature of a small room by a few degrees, tiny stars in an age before radiators. Beside it sits a small pot made of blackened metal, round and hollow, with tiny vents cut into its lid. You lift it, and it's heavier than expected. A portable brazier. The kind carried between rooms or set under tables to keep knees from freezing. Some were filled with charcoal, others with embers from the kitchen fires. The rich sometimes perfumed them with herbs, thyme, rosemary, even crushed juniper to mask the smoke. When you hold it in your hands now, you can almost feel the faint hum of life it once held. Curiously enough, one of the most ingenious inventions for warmth was also one of the most dangerous: the charcoal pot used indoors. Without chimneys or proper ventilation, carbon fumes built up quickly, claiming more lives than winter itself. Chroniclers mention deaths from the sleeping smoke, a poetic name for a deadly thing, yet people continued to risk it. Cold was the greater fear. You set the pot down and notice something else, a thick garment draped across the chair. It's a surcoat lined with fur, the kind worn by both men and women when the frost bit hardest. You run your hand along the lining. The softness surprises you. The outer layer is wool, dyed a deep blue that's faded now with age. The inner fur ermine, perhaps, still holds a silky sheen. You lift it to your shoulders, and feel at once what it must have meant to its owner: instant, enveloping warmth. Garments like this were the unseen shield of medieval life. They trapped heat close to the body, turning every person into their own mobile hearth. Cloaks, hats, mittens, even hoods lined with fox or hare, all served as insulation against the endless winter. People wore layers not for fashion but for survival. Linen next to skin to wick away damp, wool above it for warmth, and fur outermost to block the wind. One traveller's journal from 1356 describes sleeping fully clothed through winter nights, wrapped in cloak and boots, lest the cold steal breath in sleep. It sounds miserable, yet somehow comforting. They didn't chase comfort as we do, they courted endurance. The castle's very air still carries traces of those lives. You walk to the window, open the shutter slightly, and let a ribbon of cold sweep in. The contrast shocks your senses, the warmth of the fire meeting the icy breath of morning. Your cheeks prickle, your hands tighten instinctively around the cloak. For a heartbeat, you understand what they must have felt every day. That warmth was not constant, but something you earned, moment by moment. On the table beside the window rests another small curiosity, a glove, stiff with age. Its fingertips are reinforced with fine stitching, its wrist lined with sheepskin. Gloves like this were essential for everything from writing to swordplay, yet they served another, subtler purpose. In the coldest months, people slept wearing them, even indoors. To wake with stiff hands was to lose a day's labor. To wake warm was to begin it blessed. A rather overlooked practice among noble households involved sleeping hoods, close-fitting caps made of wool or felt. They looked almost comical, but they worked. Even a thin layer over the scalp preserved heat, preventing the body's warmth from bleeding into the night. Keep the head, and the heart will follow, a popular proverb of the time said. It wasn't superstition. It was science long before the word existed. You turn as a servant enters quietly, carrying a small tray. On it rests a pot of spiced ale, steaming gently, and a heel of bread still warm from the kitchen. She sets it down near the fire, bows, and leaves without a word. You sip the ale, the taste of cloves and cinnamon blooms on your tongue, sweet and faintly smoky. The warmth spreads downward, steadying your breath. Some historians believe that morning drinks like this warm ale or wine weren't mere indulgence, but necessity. Liquid heat, they called it. It filled the stomach, woke the blood, and softened the edges of the frost that waited outside. You sit again by the fire, the brazier nearby adding its own gentle glow. The room smells of metal, fur, and spice, a strange alchemy of comfort. It's astonishing how much humanity learned about warmth in a world without machines, that oil and stone, breath and wool, all held the secret if treated right. Not everyone agrees how effective these devices truly were. Some archaeologists argue they made little difference against the deep cold of medieval winters. Others point to the survival of the people themselves as proof enough. After all, warmth wasn't just physical, it was psychological, spiritual, communal. To believe oneself warm was, in part, to be warm. You finish your drink and rest your hand against the fur cloak again. The fire crackles, the brazier hums faintly. For a moment, the entire room feels alive, an orchestra of heat in all its forms. Flame, fabric, flesh. The medieval world had no electricity, no central heating, and yet somehow they mastered the art of coaxing comfort from scarcity. And as you sit there, watching the flames twist into soft ribbons of gold, you can't help but think, perhaps warmth is not something one keeps, but something one tends like a story, or a hope, or a life. Outside, the afternoon wanes into that long grey stretch between daylight and dusk, when the cold begins its quiet siege anew. The castle seems to draw inward as shadows lengthen, doors closed, shutters fastened, voices hushed. You make your way down a narrow corridor you haven't yet explored, drawn by the faint scent of earth and the hollow echo of your own steps. It leads you toward the cellars, where warmth hides in unexpected ways. Descending the stone staircase, you feel the temperature change immediately. The air grows heavy, damp, and still yet oddly insulated. Down here the cold is steady rather than sharp, a deep chill that never quite freezes. The flicker of your torch glints off barrels and casks stacked along the walls, their curved sides beaded with condensation. This is the underbelly of survival, the storehouse that fed both body and fire through the long months. Castles depended on these vaults more than any battlement. The winters were long, unpredictable, and merciless. Without stockpiled food, the hearths above would have gone silent by February. The cold you feel now was, paradoxically, both enemy and ally. It spoiled fresh food, but preserved the salted, smoked, and dried. These cellars were the medieval refrigerator, the kingdom's secret insurance policy against famine. You run your fingers along one of the barrels. The wood is cool, rough, faintly sticky with pitch. Inside, wine or ale slumbers, thick and dark. Both were safer to drink than water, and more warming besides. Liquid bread, they called ale a comfort, a calorie, a slow-burning fire for the stomach. There's a faint scent of smoke down here too, and as you follow it, you discover a narrow passage leading to the smoking room. Hooks dangle from the ceiling, and above them, blackened beams vanish into shadow. The air smells of salt, fat, and history. Rows of hams and fish hang suspended in time, preserved by heat and smoke. The very walls have absorbed it, gleaming faintly with resin. Contemporary records from English and French estates describe how these smoking rooms were kept smouldering day and night during the coldest months. Alder or beechwood was favoured, their smoke sweet and aromatic. Meats dried slowly, their flavour deepening with each week. The result was sustenance that could last until spring, a stored warmth, disguised as food. Curiously, some castles built their smokehouses close to kitchens so that the warmth from both could overlap, reducing wood use. It's an efficiency that feels almost modern. Some scholars argue that this design was deliberate, a way to harness every flicker of heat. Others believe it was just common sense born of hardship. You pause beside a row of clay jars filled with salted vegetables, turnips, cabbage, and onions, their colours long surrendered to brine. The scent is pungent but oddly reassuring. These were the quiet soldiers of winter, humble yet faithful. When fires dimmed and game grew scarce, these jars fed entire households. In the far corner, you notice something else. Stacks of split logs, carefully arranged and covered with linen. Even firewood had to be protected from dampness. Oak burned hot and slow, birch fast and bright. The castle's woodpile was as strategic as its armory. Household accounts often record precise measurements of fuel cords, counted like coins, each piece rationed with care. You kneel to touch one log. It feels almost alive, its bark rough beneath your palm. This, too, was a form of stored heat, summer sunlight captured and waiting to be released. In that thought lies something profoundly poetic, that warmth can be carried across seasons, that even in the depth of winter, the memory of summer still burns quietly inside every piece of wood. Somewhere above, you hear faint footsteps and the muffled thud of boots, a reminder that life continues above these silent chambers. Down here, though, the rhythm is slower. The air holds its breath, heavy with the scent of salt and oak. A forgotten note in a medieval household manual mentions that workers who tended the cellars often brought small animals with them, cats for the rats, and sometimes dogs for company. The animals' presence offered both practical help and companionship. In the dim glow of a single lamp, surrounded by barrels and meat hooks, even a cat's quiet purr could make the place feel warmer. You look toward a patch of stone darker than the rest. There, a small iron door opens into what was once an ash pit, a chamber where cooled embers from the upper hearths were dumped. Some were still warm when discarded, and servants would gather them, pressing them into clay molds to make fire cakes, blocks of compressed ash and charcoal dust used to rekindle flames later. Recycling, medieval style. Scholars remain divided on how widespread this practice was. Some claim it was rare ingenuity. Others insist it was common sense, born of scarcity. Either way, it reveals a mindset where nothing was wasted, not even the ghost of fire. You move deeper, and the corridor narrows until you reach a final door, heavy and iron-banded. When you pull it open, the air inside is strangely temperate. Shelves of straw line the walls, cradling apples, nuts, and roots. The faint, sweet aroma of stored fruit mingles with the cool dampness, a forgotten perfume of another season. You pick up an apple, its skin wrinkled but intact, and imagine biting into it on a day when frost has sealed the world above. The taste of something once ripened in sunlight, a memory of warmth you can hold in your hand. That, too, was part of survival. As you stand there, torch in hand, surrounded by the preserved life of summers past, you feel a strange kind of peace. This place, though dark and cold, is a sanctuary, a promise that warmth isn't only in flame but in foresight, in patience, in the quiet art of preparation. You turn to leave, climbing back toward the light. The air grows drier, thinner, warmer as you ascend. Behind you, the cellar returns to stillness, the smoke and salt and wood resuming their long conversation with time. And you realize, as you step into the corridor above, that this too was part of how they stayed warm, not just through invention or luck, but through wisdom. Warmth, in their world, began long before the cold came. It began in summer fields, in salted barrels, in careful hands stacking logs against a wall. It began, simply, with the decision to be ready. When you emerge from the cellars, the air above feels lighter, but colder too, a swift reminder that the true warmth of the castle isn't always where the light is. You make your way down a narrow hallway, guided by the faint murmur of voices and the rhythmic clink of iron. The scent of oil and leather grows stronger with each step, until you find yourself in one of the most curious sanctuaries of winter survival, the armory. It may not seem, at first, a place for warmth. Metal, after all, is the coldest companion. But this room, like so many others, has its own relationship with heat, one of friction, discipline, and endurance. Rows of armor gleam faintly in the torchlight, polished until they catch the smallest flicker of flame. Swords and halberds hang from the walls, their blades dulled by condensation. A forge rests in the corner, long cooled now, though you can still smell its ghost, iron and ash, sharp and comforting. The air here is thick with memory, the echo of hammer strikes, the hiss of water on hot metal. Blacksmiths and armourers were among the few in the medieval world who knew true heat. Their fires weren't for comfort but for creation. When the world froze, they stood before furnaces bright as suns, shaping iron while snow fell silently outside. Their work was both necessity and miracle, turning Earth's coldest element into something that could protect life. A record from a 14th-century castle in Bavaria describes the forge as the only place where winter never enters. You can picture it, sparks leaping like fireflies, the rhythmic clang of metal, the smith's face bathed in a glow so fierce it painted the walls red. Even those who came to repair a blade or hinge would linger, pretending to check their tools while stealing a few moments of warmth. Curiously enough, many blacksmiths kept dogs by their side, not just for company, but because the animals warned them when the fire's fumes grew dangerous. The smiths would say the dog's ears caught what theirs could not, the shift in the air when heat turned treacherous. You kneel beside the forge now, tracing a finger along the cracked bricks. Even cold, it feels powerful, as if it remembers every flame ever fed to it. A small pile of slag lies near the corner, glinting faintly like black glass. You pick up a fragment. It's light, rough, and strangely warm to the touch, as though it resists the chill out of sheer habit. The armourer's bench nearby is littered with remnants of labour rivets, scraps of leather, bits of wool padding used to line armour against the bite of metal. That padding, though easily ignored, was a vital shield against the cold. Without it, armor froze against skin, burning as surely as fire. There's an account of a knight in Winter Campaign who described the kiss of frost through iron. His solution was simple but clever: a layer of wool soaked in oil, creating both insulation and protection against rust. Even the weapons themselves had their rituals of warmth. Bows were kept near fires to stay supple. Bowstrings, often made from gut or sinew, were rubbed with fat to prevent freezing. The soldiers who wielded them warmed their hands over flames before battle, not for courage, but so they could draw their weapons at all. Some historians suggest that winter warfare transformed the medieval armory into something half workshop, half hearth. Armorers became keepers of heat, their fires shared with anyone who needed thawing: smith, soldier, or stray traveller. In one French record, a blacksmith fined for sleeping in his forge defended himself by saying, "Better to share the fire than die for lack of it." The judge, apparently, let him go. You can almost hear that same forge roaring to life again, the blast of the bellows, the deep roar of flame feeding on air. The smith's hammer rises and falls, steady as a heartbeat. Sparks leap, briefly lighting the faces of those gathered nearby. For a moment, it feels like ceremony, a communal act of creation and defiance against the cold. The men and women who worked here understood something others did not: that warmth was not always soft. It could be violent, roaring, shaped by will and labor. Heat, like iron, demanded respect. A curious discovery from an excavation in Wales revealed fragments of charcoal that were centuries old but still faintly greasy to the touch, evidence of animal fat mixed into the fuel to make the fires burn hotter. It was an innovation born not from science but intuition. The smell must have been dreadful, but it kept the forge alive through sleet and snow. You step back, brushing ash from your cloak, and glance toward the armor hanging along the wall. The pieces gleam like frozen sunlight helms, breastplates, gauntlets, all silent now. Once they clanged and clattered, steaming in the cold as men donned them before dawn. The armor wasn't only for battle, it was a portable hearth. Beneath it, a man carried the memory of the forge's heat, the echo of fire pressed close to the skin. In that sense, every soldier carried a fragment of warmth into the field. Every strike of the hammer that shaped their armor was an offering against the cold. The castle above might sleep under snow, but here, in this forgotten room of iron and soot, the ghost of fire lingers. The air feels denser, older, still faintly warm in its bones. You realize that warmth in this world had many faces: the gentle hearth, the crowded kitchen, the breath of animals, and this, the fierce, relentless fire that built walls, forged tools, and defied the season through sheer endurance. You linger for a while, letting the silence settle around you. The torches flicker, the shadows dance, and the scent of old smoke curls in the air like a memory. When you finally leave the armory, you can feel the temperature drop immediately, the cold rushing to reclaim what the fire once owned. But beneath your cloak, there's a trace of warmth that seems to follow you up the stairs, an echo of hammer and flame, a reminder that every comfort above rests on the shoulders of those who shaped metal in the heart of winter. And as you step once more into the corridor, the castle's hum greets you again, the steady rhythm of people, fire, and life refusing to bow to the frost. You follow the faint hum of activity through the corridor until it opens into a cavernous room where warmth is alive in its loudest, most chaotic form, the castle kitchen. The moment you step inside, the air envelops you like a wave. Smoke curls upward in slow ribbons, the scent of meat, onions, and fresh bread swirling in layers thick enough to taste. After days of dry, biting air, this feels almost tropical. The kitchen is a symphony of heat. You can hear it before you see it: the steady roar of the great hearth, the hiss of dripping fat on flame, the rhythmic clatter of pots and knives. Flames leap up from the center, licking at iron cauldrons that hang on blackened chains. Against the walls, smaller fires burn beneath clay ovens, their mouths glowing like the eyes of patient beasts. This, you realize, is the heart of the castle's warmth, not the Lord's chamber, not even the Great Hall, but this roaring, smoke-filled cave where survival is cooked one pot at a time. A surviving household record from the 13th century describes the kitchen as the sun within the stone. The phrase fits perfectly. The fire here radiates outward in waves, touching everything, the walls slick with soot, the ceiling beams glistening with years of grease, the people moving within its orbit. You step closer to the central hearth. The heat is so strong that your eyes sting, but you can't look away. A cook bends over the cauldron, stirring with a long wooden paddle, her arms glistening with sweat despite the frost outside. Steam rises around her like a ghostly veil. The cauldron's contents, some stew of barley, roots, and salted meat, bubble steadily. The smell is thick, primal, intoxicating. It's not just food, it's heat turned edible. You can almost feel it warming your bones just by breathing the air. Curiously enough, medieval kitchens often doubled as warming stations for the entire household. Servants lingered here not only for work, but for refuge. When fingers stiffened and boots froze, people drifted toward the kitchen's glow under the guise of errands. A stable boy might forget a bucket, a maid might check the bread, a guard might taste the stew. Everyone found a reason to be near the fire. And who could blame them? Even in its chaos, this room was paradise. The sound of sizzling meat, the crackle of wood, the hiss of boiling water, all wove together into a rhythm that felt alive. The cold outside was an entirely different world, one that couldn't reach through the dense, fragrant heat of this place. A cook passes by you now, balancing a tray of bread loaves round, golden, steaming. You catch the yeasty perfume as she moves past, and your stomach knots in sympathy with hunger centuries old. Bread was not just food, it was warmth preserved. Every loaf carried the memory of fire, a portable comfort. Another servant kneels near the oven, turning spits where joints of venison roast slowly. The meat glows with a sheen of fat. Sparks leap as drippings fall into the coals. She hums under her breath, a simple tune, something that sounds like an old lullaby. It mingles with the steady crackle, and together they create a sound that feels older than language itself. The kitchen was also the castle's laboratory of invention. From it came broth thickened with ground almonds, sauces spiced with cloves and ginger brought from distant lands, pies packed with dried fruits preserved from autumn harvests. These dishes weren't mere indulgence, they were warmth disguised as flavor, a way to keep spirits high and bodies strong through endless winter nights. There's an account from a cook in Burgundy who wrote proudly that his soups could warm even a miser's heart. You smile at that. In a world where cold ruled the calendar, cooking became not just nourishment but rebellion. Some experts believe the communal nature of the medieval kitchen gave rise to more than just meals, it gave rise to stories. With hands busy and minds idle, gossip, tales, and legends simmered alongside the stew. The fire didn't just cook, it inspired. You pause near a wooden table where a young kitchen hand sharpens knives. His fingers are nimble despite the chill. Beside him, another chops onions, her eyes watering from both smoke and tears. They work in companionable silence, each movement a practiced dance. When they finally stop, it's only to warm their hands over the fire, palms red and raw but grateful. A lesser-known detail in castle design reveals that kitchens were often placed against outer walls, allowing chimneys to vent smoke away quickly. But the warmth they produced seeped through the stone into neighboring rooms, bakeries, pantries, and even servant corridors. Some historians claim this layout was deliberate, creating a kind of passive heating system long before the term existed. In the corner, a cat sleeps curled on a pile of kindling, its fur shimmering orange in the firelight. Someone has draped a piece of cloth over it like a tiny blanket. Even the animals understand where life gathers. The head cook, a broad man with arms like tree trunks, shouts orders across the room. His voice is half command, half encouragement. Every word carries authority born of fire. You realize that in this small kingdom, he rules more completely than any lord. The success of a meal, the mood of the household, even the rhythm of warmth itself all depend on his domain. You watch as he sprinkles a pinch of salt into the cauldron, then tastes the broth with the solemnity of a priest offering benediction. His face softens in approval. Around him, the kitchen exhales collectively, as though reassured. Perhaps this is why the hearth was so revered. It wasn't merely a tool, it was a living presence, something that needed tending, listening, patience. The cooks, in their way, were its priests, feeding both flame and flesh, keeping despair at bay with each bubbling pot. As the evening deepens, the fires grow brighter. The heat becomes almost dizzying. Sweat trickles down your neck despite the frost still creeping at the windows. The smell of roasted herbs fills the air, sage, marjoram, thyme. You realize you've been smiling for minutes without noticing. There's laughter here too, quiet, genuine. Someone tells a joke. A few chuckles ripple through the smoke. The fire crackles louder, as if laughing along. And for a heartbeat, this kitchen feels not medieval but timeless, the same warmth shared in every human home since the first flame was stolen from lightning. When you finally step back into the corridor, the cold bites hard, startling you. You glance over your shoulder at the kitchen door, half expecting the warmth to chase you out like a living thing. It doesn't, but its echo follows you, the smells, the laughter, the light. And as your footsteps fade into the hall, you realize something profound. The truest warmth wasn't in the hearth itself, but in the hands that kept it alive. The night deepens once more, but you don't return to the upper halls this time. Instead, you follow a side passage that winds through the lower levels of the keep, where the air grows colder and the walls drip faintly with moisture. The sound of the storm outside has shifted. It's not a howl anymore, but a slow, heavy exhalation. The snow must be falling thick. You can almost feel it pressing against the castle, wrapping it tighter in silence. This time, the faint warmth that guides you doesn't come from fire, it comes from life itself. As you step through a heavy wooden door, a wave of humid air greets you, rich with the smell of hay, earth, and animal breath. You've entered the stables. The contrast is astonishing. After the cold corridors, the stable feels alive, warm, and strangely human. Horses stamp softly in their stalls, their breath curling in white plumes that mingle and fade like low clouds. The hay underfoot muffles your steps, and somewhere nearby, a goat bleats once, indignant at being disturbed. The scent is pungent, damp straw, leather, manure, but comforting too. It's the smell of endurance. In medieval life, the warmth of animals wasn't a mere side effect. It was a vital part of survival. The great beasts, horses, oxen, dogs, even pigs gave heat freely, without ever knowing the service they rendered. The temperature inside a stable, especially in midwinter, could be 10 degrees warmer than the courtyard outside. Servants knew it instinctively. They lingered here longer than duty required, their hands buried in the animals' thick coats, their faces pressed briefly into that living warmth. Records from a 12th century castle in Lincolnshire mention the watchman's hour by the beasts, suggesting that night guards rotated duties near the stables not only to keep watch but to thaw. There was method in the affection. You walk between the stalls now, listening to the quiet rhythm of breathing. A draft horse turns its head toward you, eyes liquid and calm, its breath washing over your hands like a small furnace. You scratch its muzzle gently, and it exhales again, the warmth almost startling in its intimacy. You think of all the nameless people who must have done exactly this, centuries before, seeking a moment's comfort in the steady heartbeat of an animal. Some castles even kept livestock in adjoining courtyards or chambers during the worst freezes, letting body heat rise through the floors. A few bold chroniclers recorded entire families sleeping above stables for the sake of warmth. Better to smell the beasts than the grave, one anonymous note from 1,317 quips with grim humor. Curiously enough, Animals were also a source of passive heating for entire structures. Some manors were designed with small vents or gaps between floors, channeling warm air from stables upward into the servants' rooms above. Modern engineers might call it primitive heating, but in its way, it was elegant nature's furnace, steady and generous. You pause near a low trough, watching a mare drink slowly. The surface of the water steams faintly in the warm air, a quiet miracle when the world outside is locked in ice. Someone has broken the crust of frost at its edges, leaving small shards floating like glass petals. The horse's muzzle dips again, rippling the reflection of your torchlight. Historians still debate whether medieval people saw this shared space, human and animal, as a mark of poverty or wisdom. Some call it necessity, others companionship. But standing here, you sense it was both. The warmth that radiates from these bodies is not mechanical. It's intimate, patient, reciprocal. The people fed and brushed the animals. The animals in turn gave off heat and trust. You hear a soft laugh from deeper in the stables. A young groom sits on a pile of hay, mending a harness by the light of a single lantern. His cloak is patched and his hands are red with cold, but there's an ease about him. Every now and then, one of the horses nudges him gently, as though checking his progress. He mutters something, perhaps a curse, perhaps a secret, and continues his work. It's easy to imagine this space as the castle's heartbeat, slow, steady, unpretentious. No ceremony, no finery, just the elemental exchange of warmth and labour. A rather overlooked historical record mentions that on Christmas Eve, some castle households brought the Lord's youngest child into the stables to thank the beasts for their warmth. They'd sprinkle salt or grain as a small offering. It was a ritual born of gratitude, part folklore, part faith. In a world where survival was never guaranteed, even a horse's body could seem divine. The groom finishes his mending, blows gently on the thread to tighten the knot, and sets his work aside. He leans back against the hay, pulling his cloak around him. The nearest horse lowers its head over him, exhaling softly. Within minutes, both man and beast have drifted into a shared, dreamlike stillness. You move quietly past them, deeper into the stable. The warmth feels different here, denser, heavier, as though the air itself remembers the breath of 100 winters past. You rest your palm against a horse's flank, feeling the steady thrum beneath the skin. That rhythm is the same one that beats in your own chest, the pulse of all things living through the cold. There's something profoundly humbling in that realization. All the castle's grandeur, the tapestries, the fires, the silks pales next to this simple communion of body and breath. This is warmth at its most honest, unrefined, unglamorous, irreplaceable. You linger for a while, the animals shifting gently around you. Outside, the wind sighs, but inside, there's only the soft rustle of straw and the occasional creak of wood. Time feels suspended. When you finally turn to leave, you glance back at the groom, still sleeping beneath the watchful eyes of the horses. For a moment, the whole scene seems sculpted in stillness. The boy, the beasts, the slow rise of steam from their breath, a portrait of life holding its quiet ground against the winter. And you think, as you step into the corridor once more, that this is the secret the stones never tell. Warmth doesn't only live in the hearth or the hall, it breathes, softly, in the stalls. By the following morning, the world outside has vanished into white. The snow lies so deep that even the battlements seem carved from the same frozen dream. The wind has fallen silent, leaving behind a stillness so absolute that every sound, the rustle of straw, the creak of wood, the faint hum of breath feels amplified, sacred. Inside the castle, life contracts again to its core. The flicker of the hearth, the pulse of people moving quietly through the chill. You wander into the chapel. Its door is half open, and a thin line of light spills across the stone floor like a blessing. The air inside is cold but fragrant with beeswax and old incense. Candles burn along the altar, their small flames bending slightly in unseen draughts. Their glow pools in the dimness, steady and reverent. This is another kind of warmth, spiritual, invisible, a comfort for the soul when the body falters. Faith was its own fire in medieval winters. You can almost hear it now, the low murmur of prayers, the rhythmic whisper of Latin, the soft rustle of cloaks as people kneel. When cold made survival uncertain, the promise of warmth beyond this life took on a sharper meaning. A chronicler once wrote, "In the cold of earth we seek the heat of heaven." The chaplain moves slowly between the rows, his breath ghosting in the air. His robes are thick, his hands tucked into his sleeves for warmth. Yet there's serenity in his movements, a steady rhythm born of long winters endured. He pauses to adjust a candle, and the flame jumps higher, briefly bright enough to touch the carved faces of saints along the wall. Their eyes gleam like molten gold in the shifting light. Curiously, the chapel was often one of the warmest spaces in a castle, not from fires, which were rarely allowed, but from the people themselves. When the household gathered for Mass, their combined breath and body heat softened the chill. For those brief moments, warmth was communal, tangible, holy. You step closer to the altar, and the faint smell of wax fills your nose, sweet, earthy, comforting. The candles here are more than light. They are symbols of endurance. Each flame represents a soul, a hope, a plea for protection against the cold world beyond the walls. You watch one candle sputter slightly, then regain its strength, the wick glowing with renewed life. It feels almost human in its struggle. In some regions, villagers and nobles alike believed that the act of lighting candles could ward off frost and sickness. The warmth of faith defies the storm. One priest is said to have told his parish, whether superstition or solace, it offered something the fire could not, a sense that warmth was not merely borrowed from wood or wool, but gifted from within. You move along the pews, running your fingers over the smooth, time-worn wood. It's surprisingly warm to the touch, as though the prayers of countless hands have soaked into it. The air carries the faint hum of a chant, now slow, low, and resonant, filling the chapel like mist. The words are ancient, the melody simple. Even without understanding it, you feel its rhythm pulse through the space. A lesser-known practice in some castles involved using the chapel as a refuge during extreme frost. Servants slept against the south-facing walls at night, wrapped in blankets, believing that proximity to consecrated space invited divine warmth. A record from 14th century Brittany even describes people lighting small clay lamps beneath the pews, tiny, secret hearths flickering in the house of God. Not everyone approved. To sleep before the altar is to mistake faith for comfort, one bishop wrote disapprovingly. But the people did it anyway. When ice crusted over wells and windows, and the fires above ran low, the chapel's silence became its own kind of shelter. You kneel for a moment, feeling the cold of the stones seep through your knees. Yet there's peace in it, a quiet that doesn't demand, only listens. You breathe out, and the air shimmers faintly in the candlelight. It's easy to understand how faith and fire blurred together here, how the act of tending a flame could become a prayer. Outside, the snow presses softly against the stained glass, muting the light but amplifying the color. Reds, blues, and greens glow faintly, like jewels buried in frost. You imagine the congregation gathered here centuries ago, their faces bathed in that same quiet radiance, drawing hope from the warmth of color itself. Some historians believe that winter worship was less about doctrine and more about endurance. The rituals, the singing, the candles, the closeness reminded people that warmth existed even when unseen. You find comfort in that thought, that survival in such times depended as much on spirit as on kindling. A curious old custom described by monks in Normandy speaks of fire blessings held each February. Ashes from the hearth were brought into the chapel and mixed with oil to anoint the doors and thresholds, so that heat may dwell where hands and hearts meet, one line reads. The mingling of the sacred and the practical was seamless faith woven into daily survival. You rise slowly, the air crisp against your skin. The candles flicker again, and for a heartbeat, the entire chapel seems to breathe with you. There's no grand revelation here, only the steady truth that warmth, in every form, is an act of devotion. As you turn to leave, you glance once more at the altar, where the last of the candles burns low. Its flame wavers, then steadies, defying the draught that whispers through the door. You smile faintly. Somehow, that single, stubborn light feels like the perfect symbol for this world you've been wandering through a flame that refuses to die, no matter how long the winter lasts. Outside, the cold waits, but inside, faith like fire still burns. By evening, the storm has begun to ease. The wind, once fierce, exhales its last breath through the arrow slits, and the snow outside glows faintly in the moonlight, soft as candle wax. Inside the castle, every fire is alive again. The hearths blaze in quiet triumph, their smoke rising like hymns into the night. You walk through the corridors slowly, listening to the subdued murmur of life, the scrape of a stool across stone, the faint hum of a song, the rhythmic crackle of logs giving way to flame. Every corner of the castle now seems to hold its own pocket of warmth. You pass the kitchen, where the last pots simmer gently, the cooks nodding by the dying embers. You pass the stables, where the horses shift in their sleep, their breath ghosting the dark. You pass servants' quarters, where snores mingle with soft laughter, blankets pulled high against the cold. The great hall glows faintly through the doorway, its fire painting the walls gold and red. You stop there a moment, leaning on the frame. The scene before you feels timeless. Men and women gathered in small clusters, sharing ale, murmuring stories, staring into the fire as though it holds their dreams. A few children play near the hearth, their shadows leaping huge across the walls. For once, there is no urgency, only stillness. It occurs to you that this fragile moment of peace is what all the fires, the labours, the layers of wool and stone were for, to hold back the dark just long enough for one night of rest. The castle has weathered another storm, as it has done for centuries, but it feels changed, as though the walls themselves have absorbed the memory of heat and laughter. You can almost sense it breathing its heart beating in time with every flicker of flame. You wander closer to the hearth. The logs are half burned now, glowing a deep, steady orange. The air smells of oak and wool, the faint sweetness of smoke mingled with something older, an essence that feels almost human. You sit, stretching your hands toward the fire, and feel the warmth creep slowly back into your fingers. A scroll lies open on the table beside you, a list of provisions and repairs written in careful script. The handwriting is small, practical, unromantic, yet it speaks volumes. Every entry is a story of endurance. Barrels of salt, cords of wood, candles tallied and rationed. You run your eyes along the page and realize how thin the line was between survival and surrender. Some chroniclers say castles were symbols of power. Standing here, you know better. They were symbols of patience. Every stone, every hearth, every rush of flame was built not just for defense, but for waiting. The people who lived here weren't simply fighting wars. They were learning the art of persistence, how to live gently beside the cold without ever letting it win. A curious old saying comes to mind, whispered by travelers who survived harsh winters. The snow teaches fire to remember itself. Perhaps that's the lesson hidden in all this, the truth that warmth means nothing without the memory of cold. You rise and walk toward the window. The shutters are closed, but a small gap lets in a sliver of moonlight. It touches the frost along the glass, turning it to silver lace. The world beyond is silent. No footsteps, no voices, only the slow breathing of the night. Yet you can feel life pulsing beneath it, roots waiting in the frozen earth, seeds dreaming of spring. Inside, the fire shifts, releasing a shower of sparks that swirl upward, then vanish into the dark. You watch them rise, and think of all the small flames that came before torches carried through blizzards, coals shared between neighbors, candles lit in prayer. Every spark is a memory, a thread in the long, quiet story of warmth. And maybe that's what these winters gave to the people who lived them. Not despair, but gratitude. Each ember became a miracle, each dawn a kind of resurrection. They didn't just survive the cold, they learned to live with it, to listen to it, to build beauty in defiance of it. You take one last look around the hall. The fire is lower now, but steady. Someone throws on another log, and the light flares up once more, wrapping every face in gold. For a brief moment, you feel it, the collective warmth of centuries, the soft hum of shared endurance. It settles in your chest like peace. You close your eyes and breathe in deeply, letting the warmth soak through the last of your cold bones. Outside, snow continues to fall, slow and soundless, covering the world in quiet perfection. Inside, the fire keeps its vigil. The storm has passed. The night holds steady, and somewhere in the dark you know the embers will last until morning. The castle sleeps now. The fires have dimmed to soft, glowing hearts of red. Smoke drifts lazily through the chimneys, and the air tastes faintly of wood and rest. Outside, the snow gleams like powdered glass beneath the moon. The world is utterly still, no wind, no voice, only the hush of time folding in on itself. You breathe slowly, matching the rhythm of the silence. The warmth around you feels different now, less fierce, more tender. It moves like a slow tide, touching stone and skin alike. The great hall, the stables, the kitchens, all the places you've wandered tonight are bound together by that same quiet pulse, the kind that lives not in flame, but in memory. You picture the people who once lived here, sleeping soundly beneath fur and linen, their dreams soft as ash. The guards at their posts, the servants curled near embers, the cook still dozing by her oven's glow, each breath a thread of warmth weaving through the long night. Outside, the snow keeps falling, but gently now, flakes so fine they seem to hover in place. The storm is done, the world exhales. And in that silence you find peace too. You imagine yourself settling beside the hearth, letting your eyes drift closed, the glow painting soft shapes against your lids. The fire crackles one last time, then steadies into stillness. The castle will wake again when the sun returns, but for now, all that exists is warmth, patience, and sleep. So, rest here a little longer. Let the quiet wrap around you. Let the cold stay outside. The fire is still burning. Sweet dreams.